Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 141. Somewhere else, 2. Gamma City, northeastern central region of Earth. It had been several months since the world ended. One day everything was still normal and the next everything had changed. All connections between the great cities had broken down. They entered the system era. Most people were perplexed by the sudden message of the apocalypse. Others fell into a panic, but it was not that bad at the start. Except for the broken down communication system, there was no change. Few people did the tutorial, as they did not take it seriously in the beginning. This led to a great number of citizens being assigned a random class. Still, the city stayed mostly civilized. There were those who had done the tutorial and explained everything to the others. The leadership created an emergency government to keep the city under control. Then monsters started to randomly appear from portals. They found out that modern firearms were useless in the system era, you could not even hurt a normal player with them. Still, the crisis was solved. Even with random assignments, every third person had a combat-oriented class. Within the first few weeks many stepped up to fight the monsters and a system was created to efficiently deal with the invaders. Inspired by history, bands and guilds were formed under the leadership of the government. People were sent out to other cities to get information. Of course, there were those who wanted to use their newfound powers for their own benefit. But as the saying goes, in a world where everyone is special, no one is special. A thief trying to rob an old lady ended up in hospital when the old lady took out her bow and shot him down with a multi-shot skill. Attributes and skills were not bound by age. Many older people became a lot healthier as if they had become younger. The news made the round when they managed to connect with some satellite cities. Yet, everything was looking great. She and her group were currently hiding in the outskirts of a satellite city at the border of Gamma. They were on the run. She pulled the curtain aside and looked at the streets outside. The once neat suburbs looked as if a horde of beasts had rioted in the streets. Windows were smashed and the streets were filled with all kinds of broken furniture and rubbish from the demolished houses. It was evening, the world was darkening as if to match her mood. Just how did this happen? The sound of shattering glass made her jump. It was in the back of the house. She rushed to the kitchen in the back to be confronted by a horrifying scene. It was her uncle standing over the limp bodies of two of her party members. Her brother and cousin lay there on the ground with severely bleeding claw marks. Their armors were cut like paper. In its hand, her uncle, held the neck of her father's limp body. Hee, there you are, the creature that was once her uncle spoke in a deranged voice. Tears filled her eyes and sorrow and anger welled up in her chest. Her uncle did this, but it was not her uncle's fault. Who was she supposed to blame here? Yo-hee, don't look at me like this, sweetie. Swift, way too fast. In the blink of an eye, the creature had moved and grabbed her from behind. With its grotesque arm covered in a hard shell and ending in claw-like fingers, it held her waist while the other caressed the cheek. She was petrified. Her uncle's once familiar face pressed against her cheek and a long alien tongue wandered over her skin down to her neck. Kick. Why so distant? Don't be like that. Soon you will be very close to me. Just like your mom was. Nausea grew in her stomach. Scenes of the day merely a week ago flashed in her mind. The day they caught her uncle and ambushed the hideout. Worse than wild beasts, only commanded by the lowest human emotions and basic instincts. Completely unfettered, the horde had pounced on them. Sorrow clouded her mind and something dark sprouted in her heart. She had been indecisive. She had been too emotional. It was her fault. Her gaze fell on the bodies of her father, brother, and cousin. The light in her eyes dimmed. It could feel her body stop trembling. Kek. Did you break? Did you finally give up? Oh, how long had he waited to taste the tender flesh of his niece? Ever since. Ugh. Bittersweet waves of pain flooded his body. How? What? The girl he had just held in his arms had grabbed both his wrists and crushed his flesh to the bone. Ding. Passive skill, Heart of Steel acquired. Her eyes lost the light as her hand wrapped in divine aura crushed that face that once belonged to her uncle. She held onto one of the wrists and didn't let go. She could barely overwhelm it in strength when she used the skills of a monk. She would be dead, the moment the creature could move freely. This needed to end fast before the effect of the skill stopped working. It was stunned after taking hits to the head, so she pinned it to the ground and kept wailing on it. At some point, the skull caved in, but she kept pounding until there was little left above the neck. These things had a tenacious vitality and often revived from even the most life-threatening wounds. She knew it was not dead. There never was a kill notification, no matter what one did to them. Heavily breathing, she stood over the body of the thing. She looked at the bodies of her family on the ground. It was not over yet. The two on the ground were unconscious, her father was dead, for now. She took up her father's sword and started to dismember all of them. Not once did her face change as she divided her loved ones' bodies. Not even when their blood sprayed into her face. The lack of a kill notification proved that it was too late for them. Ding! You have dismembered your own family in a most gruesome way. Requirements for a class change met. Would you like to change to the rare class Rakshasa? Y/N. A rare class? While she stared at the system window, the rest of her party returned. It was her sister and her sister's boyfriend. They were out scouting during the attack. They looked at the scene and the girl's lifeless eyes. Her sister pulled her into a tight hug. She tried not to look at the ground. Azarchist, the man asked, looking at the parts of the creature on the ground. Uncle Jacob, she answered taciturnly. Her sister froze for a moment and the man beside them cursed. The three wanted to mourn the dead, but they knew that their time was limited. They collected the body parts with a heavy heart and put them all on a makeshift bonfire and doused everything in gas. Even burning would not kill these creatures. All they did was buy time. Several days, maybe a week. Leaving the burning remains behind, they hurriedly set off. The fire would lure even more of them. They got into a car the two had found when scouting. It looked as if an enraged gorilla tried to flatten it, but it was still running. Sitting on the back seat, her eyes again focused on the small system window. A class change. Chapter 142. Down the rabbit hole. People were turning their heads when Seth ran past them. But as he was sprinting towards the church, he felt the compulsion wear off and became slower. Was it over? Oh no. Seth, a fat old man with a Santa Claus beard wearing a red robe, came running towards him. No. Seth denied reality. Seth, you have to flee. They are coming. Simon insisted as he grabbed the young man and started pulling him away from the street. Okay, I'm playing along. Who? Angels, answered the old man and pulled him into the shadows of a dark alley close to the church, while vigilantly staring into the sky. Angels? You got to be kidding me. Messengers, angels, call them whatever you want. Hurry, they are after you. But why? I don't think I offended anyone. I even fought demons just a while ago. The priest looked at him flabbergasted. So that is how they knew. Look, here we don't have much time. To sum it up, some really evil god in an antagonistic relationship with the Krishna Empire is not okay with Orihumas joining us and somehow found out your location. Maybe because someone was spotted by demons. Not blaming anyone, of course. He paused slightly and gave Seth a meaningful glance. Anyway, do you still have the teleport stone I gave you in Hike? You should be able to escape if you... I don't have it anymore. Seth interrupted him embarrassedly. Look, once you have an inventory, it gets really bothersome to keep things on your person. Don't look at me like that. I forgot it during a stay in an inn. Seth tried to explain himself while Simon looked at him with bulging eyes. Do you have any idea how expensive THA? No, we don't have time for this. We have to get to the church and immediately prepare a portal to... His last words were drowned by the roaring of a giant flaming gate that opened in the sky above Aura. What came out of the gate looked not much better than the demons that appeared recently. The humanoid bodies were covered in pitch black skin with a metallic or wet sheen. Featureless blank faces and two long limbs that ended in delicate hands. They were just there in the air, no floating, no wings, they stood there as if on solid ground. Hurry, come. Simon urged and pulled him along into the church building. An unsettling voice that sounded like dissonant static noise, but with clear meaning, echoed through the city without being hindered by distance or walls. Resistance is futile. There is no escape. Prepare the warp tunnel. Simon screamed at a clerk while he kept pulling Seth further into the church. What? But the warp tunnel is... Just do it. We have no time. Wait, what is the warp tunnel? No time to explain. Resistance is futile. There is no escape. Simon pulled Seth into a big hall with a big bottomless pit in the middle. The pit of death. Seth uttered. Activate. Simon called and a row of runes around the border of the round hole lit up. Take care over there. No, you can't be serious about this. You really gonna? Simon kicked him into the pit of death. This is all I can do for you, he screamed as Seth started falling. It was drowned his Seth's earth-shattering scream. Seth fell and screamed and fell. He took a short break from screaming because his throat was sore. He also tried to take a break from falling, but that didn't work. He soon lost his motivation to scream and his sense of time as he kept falling down this black tube. Seth finally had the time to calm down and used the time to think about his situation. Simon arguably tried to help him, so this warp thingy would probably bring him to Earth, somehow. This happened at a really inopportune time. At least he managed to finish his training. There were no changes in his status, but he felt really satisfied to look at his skills. Blacksmith, Journeyman, Leave 1, 0%. Enchantment, Journeyman, LV1, 0%. Goldsmith, Adept, Leave 9, 30%. Blacksmith Size Leave 5. Blueprint, Adept, Leave 3. Soul Infusion Leave 3. Spirit Smithy Leave 5. Spirit Capture Leave 4. Spirit Forging, Adept, Leave 1. Orpheus Voice, Passive, Leave 4. Weapon Mastery, Expert, Leave 3, 2%. Calm Reaction, Passive, Leave 7. Fear Resistance, Passive, Leave 8. Poison Resistance, Passive, Leave 3. Fire Affection, Passive, Leave 5. Pyrokinesis, Ability, Leave 2. Map Leave 4. Observation Leave 4. Concealment Leave 4. Energy Circulation Leave 9. Sewing, Beginner, Leave 6, 45%. Universal Translation Leave Max. Compulsive Precognition, Ability, Leave 1. It was not just the 3 crafting skills that had grown a lot. The new skills like Energy Circulation and Orpheus Voice had grown and brought him many surprises. Especially the latter. Not only did it now increase the success chance by 100%, but it also increased the effects of ballads by 30%. He felt confident that he would be able to make great items to survive on Earth, especially with the materials he had swiped from towards storage. But Seth would have preferred to make those awesome items before being thrown back into that world. Who knew how Earth looked now, after over half a year? He would have to make things work with the items he had for now. As for weapons, he had his hammer, his bow, and several demonic weapons. Armor-wise there was still the Dark Knight armor, which should serve him well for some time. He also had the gambesons made from ancient and celestial bronze. He also finally had some time to take a look at Naddle's new work. Celestial Gambeson. Epic. Physical DEF, 750. Mag DEF 250. Durability 3000. 1 Strength and Defense by 50% for 10's mana cost 50. 2 Weight of the armor is decreased by 75%. 3 plus 40% power to all fire and light-based attacks. 4 Item is immune to fire or light damage. A high-quality cloth armor made by the experienced hands of tailor craftsman Naddle. Excellent weaving and sewing techniques imbued this item with overwhelming performance and effects. His eyes almost fell out of his head. This was a cloth armor whose pure physical attributes surpassed the cuirass of the Dark Knight set, which was plate armor. On top of it came the abilities it inherited from the celestial bronze. Just what would become out of this, once he infused a soul? Above all, it was immune to fire, so he would not end up naked anymore. Aside from this, he also had a box with some rare rings and accessories he had not yet brought to the shop. He would have to see if he still had something fitting. There were also the epic ring Dragon Bane and the token. He was occupied with his inventory when things started appearing that fell together with him. A broken chair and table that looked rather modern. Papers with printed text. Trash made up of plastic wrappings. He could also feel that his fall was slowing down. Was he getting closer to his destination? Seth equipped the token. Maybe the Lich had something to contribute in this situation. You put me away for several weeks. How dare you? Is this a warp tunnel? What sick fuck threw you into a warp tunnel? What do you mean? Is it dangerous? Simon kicked me in without explaining anything. Is it dangerous? He asks. No, the travel is really safe, it's the landing that's the problem. Some might call the exit point of these things unprecise, others would say totally random. Oh. If it's only that, then it is okay. Even when I travel with the Pathworks portals, the exit would be random. Seth said, relieved. He had been prepared to come out in some random location, to begin with. PFF. Those are not the same. The system god's interference will still make sure you come out in some place where you have a good chance to survive. It's not random. This tunnel can spit you out at any place that gives enough room for you. A tiny hole in the ground or 3000 meter above the open sea. Guess what will happen then? You will starve, suffocate, or fall and turn into a fine paste upon impact with the ocean. 100% death. Do you get now what random means? She sounded really smug about explaining his possible deaths. Oh. Yeah, that wouldn't be nice. Let's pray and hope I'm lucky. The both of us. Why should I pray for your luck? You cheated several meals from me and kept me sealed in that inventory. Think about it. If I die in the open sea, this token will sink to the bottom of the ocean. How long would it take for someone to summon you again? Spending eons on the seabed, surrounded by silence and fish. Maybe you are lucky and we both die when I land on solid ground. At least it would be over fast, right? Just summon me, if we come out somewhere dangerous. His fall had now drastically slowed, and at this point, it suddenly felt as if the world had turned upside down. He was not falling anymore but rising. Then appeared a circular hole in the distance, the exit. Put on whatever items and armor you have. I can't help you if you die from a sudden attack or impact before you summon me. Following her advice, Seth put on the Naddle set and the celestial gambeson he got from Naddle, then the Dark Knight set from Tord. He wore the bracelet that increased health, the Dragon Bane, the pendant of the Nightcrawler, and a ring that increased his endurance and strength by 25 each. And lastly, he equipped Karen's obol and the big shield he had made from the snake skull of the Titanoboa. With that, all preparation to ensure his initial survival were done. Chapter 143. Return. The light became bigger and he finally floated out of the tunnel. His eyes met a beautiful sight. Before him spread out the snow-covered slopes of mountains and valleys that led down into a wide plain. For a moment he was free of gravity as he enjoyed this view. Then gravity kicked in and he fell. Before he could react, he was already tumbling down the steep rocky slope below him. He once again felt freed from the fetters of gravity, as he flew over a cliff. With the sound of breaking branches and rustling leaves, he crossed the crowns of the trees and smashed into the forest floor like a meteorite. Pain, immeasurable pain. His HP had fallen to 413/1000. It was fair to say that he was half dead. Fall damage was a bitch. Why didn't you summon me? No time, ugh. Puffles. Cures Q. Look who only remembered the great me in his time of need. The Eye-Visor was summoned and started casting healing spells on the mangled Seth. The armor had some dents and scratches but was fine except for losing some durability. When he could finally slightly turn his head, he looked up to the cliff he just had the pleasure to fall off. He had rolled down the mountain and fell straight down into the forests at its foot. It took about 20 minutes before he was healed enough to stand up. That was Puffles skimping on the healing spells, otherwise, it would have been faster. Q? Where are we? The caterpillar looked around the mountain forest. That was a good question. Seth pulled up the map and found the familiar world map of Earth. How much he had missed the look of this giant continent. His marker was close to the center. If his geographical knowledge didn't betray him, he should be somewhere in the neutral zones between the city regions Delta in the center and Epsilon in the southeast. This meant he was about a day's journey away from civilization, in each direction. Delta was northwest up the mountains, Epsilon southeast in the direction of flatter land. The decision was easy, Y City became his destination. He wanted to find a good and safe place to set up a workshop, the city seemed the best option. Using the automap function, he scouted the area and found his way around the forest. On the way he tried not to think of the loose end he had left behind because of this emergency escape. He wasn't sure whether Finn would become angry or sad when she found out that he was gone. I have to find a church and send them a letter. Why are we in this forest? We should go to City Y and Hoftatata, make some new followers, Kieg. Whoever spoke got a powerful blow against the head as an answer. Shut it. You still don't manage to control your urges. Stop stroking your thing already. We have our orders, why else would we lurk here to ambush travelers? The Herg. Can I go first if we find one? SHH, there is someone, a third voice warned them. The figures fell silent and looked down at the path, below their hiding spot. It was a small party of 3 people. There was a handsome guy in sparkling armor, covered in lavish edgings. Following him were two more or less cute girls, a typical priest and mage wearing tight robes, not much better than their starter gear. A typical mid-level harem party. All of them were looking at the two girls with a wolfish grin. Easy prey, and such an entertaining one at that. They could have a lot of fun with those two. The 5 figures dropped from the trees and surrounded the playboys group. Revealed in the light was a group of almost normal-looking humans. It was just that their proportions seemed slightly off, but at a second glance, one could see growths and bulges moving under their skin. Tahik. Hello there. We didn't want to scare you, one of them said, but he had a hard time swallowing his salvia while speaking. The young man at the front of the party unsheathed his sword and brought forth a big tower shield. The steel glinted in the dim forest's light. They were made by the blacksmith from a starter village close to City Y. Who are you? He said while getting into a defensive position and activating the few effects of his armor pieces. It had taken many dungeon dives to assemble his armor that was a mix of dungeon drops and parts bought from the blacksmith. Even though they were still common, they were a lot better than starter gear many others were still using even today. The mutations looked at the ugly and mismatched armor parts and grinned with schadenfreude. Then at the girls in the back who had readied their staffs. Ahik, are you proud to own such an ugly set of armor? Kiik, you think some flimsy hammered metal and items can help you? Its teeth and claws grew longer and sharper as it was talking, and now it rushed at the young man. The other two also made their move and jumped forth, aiming to capture the two women. They would not turn them, yet. It was no fun afterward. Zarkists, the young man said under his breath as he attempted to block the claws with his shield. An attempt was made. The claws ignored the thin energy membrane that covered the shield and directly cut the metal into strips as if it was paper. The man had to step back to evade being hit by the terrifying weapon. Grasping this chance, he used shield bash and shoved the attacker away with what was left of his shield. His sword didn't rest as he attacked the two that tried to get past him. An energy blade cut off the left leg of the closes right above the knee. The one furthest away was met with a water cutter right in his face that destroyed both eyes and left a deep gash. Both of them were now lying on the ground screaming in pain. Good reflexes. You will be a great addition to our community. The leader jumped at the man from behind, and the other was barely able to react and block the incoming claws with his sword covered in mana. Again, the coating gave little to no resistance and the sharp fingernails cut deep into the edge of the weapon. His heart jumped when he saw that the block had succeeded. They had two downed. As long as they managed to incapacitate the leader, they would be able to flee. Koku, it's painfully obvious what you are thinking. The young man's face fell as the screams of pain made an unsettling change and sounded more like squeals of joy. He looked to the side, and that leg he had cut off had grown tentacles and went to reattach to its owner. Suddenly he felt a burning pain in his stomach and a gush of blood and vomit traveled up his throat. Kiik, never look away in a fight, day. The claw hand not stuck in the sword had easily penetrated his armor and was now snugly fit in the hole it had punched into his torso. The leader pulled away and blood gushed on the forest floor. It was over. There was no escape for him anymore. If he had no hope anyways, he could still help the girls escape. With newfound motivation, he went into a suicidal frenzy and attacked the monster before him. Kahak, hit me as much as you like. Let me show you what real armor looks like. Not the pitiful trash those useless metal kneaders sell you. The sword crashed into the leader's chest with a loud bang and finally broke in two where the claws had cut it. The dying man looked at the monster with empty eyes as it ripped off the flimsy cloth covering its body. The skin was covered in horny skin and bone growths. There was not even a scratch where the sword just hit it. Kaie, the one who had lost his eyes, had recovered first and attacked the priest. When the mage girl finally finished her chant and threw a fireball, it burned away the Zarkist's clothes. It stopped the charge but did no damage at all. The creature's skin was covered in layers upon layer of thick leathery skin flaps that shielded the body. Rejoice! Soon all of you will ugh. He was interrupted by a gush of blood from his mouth. Metal kneaders, you say? Let me show you what a real armor looks like. Behind the leader stood a tall knight in black armor. The dark visor exuded a menacing aura as he kicked the creature forward to pull his weapon out of its back. Blood was dripping from a long, sharpened spike. It was a raven's beak with the sharpened spike like a beak on one side, a hammerhead at the other, and a long spike at the top. An oppressive feeling befell anyone who looked at the knight, and they all felt the strength leave their bodies. Everyone froze and looked afraid at the new actor that entered the stage. Who are you? The leader pressed out as his body frantically healed his ruptured heart and lungs. The knight gave no answer, but his weapon did as his hammerhead crushed the leader's head like a watermelon. Kihirk. You are open. The one who had just regained his leg jumped up to attack the knight, only to be shot down by a light arrow from the shrubbery behind the knight. There was now a crisp smoking hole in his head and he crumbled on the floor. No, you. Chapter 144. Zarkan. Initially, Seth had not planned to interfere when he came across this altercation. He was not a hero and it really was not his business if two groups of people fought each other. He didn't want to alarm anyone, so he only judged them from what he saw in his experience. The harem party seemed to be a little weaker than C ranks in aura, so somewhere in the early to mid-30s level-wise. That wasn't right. Since he was back in Earth they should be in the mid-teens to early 20s, he guessed. He could freely use his blacksmith's eyes, but Seth could only shake his head when he saw the standard of their equipment. The robes of the girls were just cloth and had barely any defensive value. The young man's armor was a bad fit. The parts with options that probably came from the dungeon changed to fit his size, but the other parts were either too big or too small and kept getting in the way of his movements at times. Defense-wise his armor was about as good as the first one Seth made for himself. With the difference that Seth's opponents back then were a lot weaker. Scaled to Earth's standard these guys should be around Seth's level or maybe a little lower. With a level difference of between 5 and 10, the harem party had little chance. As he had expected, the young man put up a good fight. He probably had an uncommon class like a knight. Kahak, hit me as much as you like. Let me show you what real armor looks like. Not the pitiful trash those useless metal kneaders sell you. Seth pursed his lip. He was about to simply walk away, but this just became something personal. Did he want to compare weapons? Seth would show him what armor penetration looked like. What was better than a raven's beak? The beak to cut leather, mail, and flesh, the hammer to crush plate, and the spike on top to pierce in the gaps and keep people at distance. With concealment and his increased attributes it was easy to appear behind the braggart's back unnoticed. Instinctively he swung the heavy weapon from below to cut through the gap between ribs and right into the lungs and heart. Who are you? At this moment Sted actually hesitated for a moment. Metal kneaders. He was dead anyway, this was just showing mercy by ending his suffering. With a satisfying crunch, the head exploded. There was no kill notification, despite crushing the head. At this moment another one attacked but got shot down by Puffles. Again, not notification despite a headshot. The third of them finally came back to his senses and furiously attacked Seth. He dodges, weaved, and evaded many of Puffles' attacks. Those that hit only left a small mark on the leather flaps that covered its body. Seth ignored the claws and took a mighty swing. The creature thought it was lucky as it hit his cuirass and could only look in surprise as its claws simply slid over the metal without leaving more than a scratch. The surprised look was locked on its face as the crow's beak penetrated the crown of its skull. Again, no notification. HP 1/1000. Observation told him that all of them were locked at 1 HP and healing. We have to hurry. They will soon heal and attack again. The mage girl overcame her fear of the armor and urged them all to leave. What about your friend? The young man had lost consciousness and was slowly bleeding out. You don't know Zarkists? It's too late for him, he is already infected and will turn into one of them. We have to leave, there will always be reinforcements when one defeats them. Alright then. Where are we going? There is an outpost of City Y close by. We should go there. Is that okay? Seth nodded. He had no concrete plans anyway. Wait. Don't you see it? Take off your helmet and look at their corpses. It was the lich that suddenly decided to talk. Taking off the helmet? The two girls were flabbergasted when the knight suddenly took off his helmet and showed the face of a handsome young man. Once he had taken off the helmet, he saw what Al was talking about. The souls of the Zarkists were bound to their bodies by chains that linked far into the distance. A smirk appeared on the young man's face when he saw that all of them had medium-sized souls. He, well look at this bountiful harvest. The two girls saw him laughing to himself and suddenly the black gauntlets smashed into the chest of the incapacitated. This was Seth using soul capture to release the soul from the chains and collecting it. Ding! You have killed Paul Paulson, leave 25, you have earned experience. Finally, a kill notification and, with the soul harvested, the body suddenly started to rot incredibly fast and tuned into a kind of black residue. They said there would be reinforcements. Seth was tempted to stay and harvest the whole herd. Better not. Und the unbelieving gaze of the two girls, he went around and got rid of all the bodies and their dead friend. We should go. I'm not confident that I can fight a big group of these guys. His equipment was nowhere near as good as he would have liked, and he had no idea what levels these guys could reach. It was better to leave. The girls nodded, still staring at him, until he gestured for them to lead the way. He put the helmet back on and followed them. Ding! The host of many is showing interest in your actions. What? Who was the host of many? This was the first time he had gotten a message like this. What was going on? Al, do you know something about a host of many? He whispered so the girls couldn't hear it. Nope. Never heard of that. Why are you asking? Oh, just got swiped right, I guess. What are you even talking about? You know what, forget it. They followed the path and Seth kept checking the map. The path really led toward Epsilon, the territory of City Y. Boing! They heard a weird noise from the front. Is that a slime? Seth asked awkwardly while the girls were panicking. It's an oozer. Just where did you come from, that you don't know this? We have to evade it. These things are almost immune to physical attacks, and magic is also weakened, too, the mage girl suggested. Oozer leave 18. It was a giant blob of 2 meters in diameter that moved by jumping almost 4 meters up into the air. It looked similar to slime, but it was a ball of toxic green jelly and about 10 times the size of the ones he knew. Observation had provoked it, and it now came in their direction. Are you trying to fight it or something? These things corrode weapons. I've seen a steel sword dissolve in a matter of seconds after being covered in oozer fluid. It's that corrosive? This might be interesting. Seth brought out a demonic yatagan made from one of the snake's fangs. The material had lower durability, but an inherent resistance to poison and corrosion. It would be a good test. Seth also wanted to see what an oozer would drop. The two girls saw him bring out a weapon and decided that they had no choice but to cooperate with him. The priest girl managed to finish the chant for a buff right before Seth started to take a swing, drawing a thin blue line of light across the oozer's massive body. The monster quivered and jumped back as if in pain, despite the cut slowly closing again. Even if Seth couldn't hit the core, his soul fire could easily vaporize the viscous body. On top of that, Seth suspected that his flame also did damage to the soul. Healing the body was easy, but an injury to the soul made even the undead weep. After his second swing, he finally spotted the creature core moving within the gelatinous body, and he tried something he had come up with during his training with Tord. Seth aimed for a stab and pierced the weapon into the oozer's body all the way up to the handle, and then shot a tiny concentrated fireball from the tip straight at the core. It was the best way to conserve mental energy when using the soul fire. The fireball missed the core and exploded about 10 centimeters behind it. The bubble of the explosion blasted all the ooze around the core away. Seth took a step back to await the creature's next move, but its body suddenly started melting into a corrosive puddle, only leaving the core. As the two girls kept staring stupefied, Seth bowed down to loot the corpse. Technically he could have just grabbed the core, but he didn't really want to touch the acid. So, he touched a small part of the core where the ooze had run off and used loot. Oozer's damaged core, crafting material, uncommon. The slightly cracked core of an oozer has various uses in crafting. Ooze, crafting material, rare. A strong poisonous acid the oozer uses to digest his food and defend itself. When he checked the yatagan for damages, he found that the durability had gone down by quite a bit, but the maximum durability had increased and the poison effect on the weapon had strengthened. This meant that despite the enchantment talking about blood, the effects would change depending on the kind of blood the prey possessed. Interesting. Chapter 145. Zarkan, 2. The lifelights of 4 followers have been extinguished. What should we do? Asked one of the 2 figures in dark robes. They stood in a wide hall with a vaulted ceiling and no windows. The walls were covered in a moist red growth, like membrane and blood vessels. Here and there were lights glowing at the ends or crossings of these vessels. Some were bright, some became dim, and just now 4 had been extinguished. What do you mean extinguished? Speak clearly, man. These lights can't be extinguished. If you see some of them dimming, send reinforcement to their location. You've been here long enough to know that. Ha, man. These noobs taking years off my life with their jokes. But I mean it. 3 of them just extinguished, and one that had just started flickering also went out. What does that even mean? What did it mean? The lights in this hall represented the condition and connection of all followers of this branch to their apostles. The light being extinguished meant that the follower lost their connection somehow. But how would that happen? They were immortal. Even if their enemy was overwhelmingly strong, even if their bodies were mangled, burned, and buried, they would still stand up again. Death was simply impossible. I will have to talk to the high priest, he sighed and left the room. So, you are saying a few months after the apocalypse gods descended onto the world and started handing out blessings? Yes. And these Zarkists are the follower of some crazy flesh god and his apostle? Exactly. That's crazy. Yeah, the whole apostle thing is crazy. I heard the gods are watching us for amusement, like some kind of game show. And if they see someone fun, they will lend them part of their powers. Despite creeps like the Zarkists appearing, I would call it a net profit since many apostles are, okay, I guess. At least they fight on our side most of the time. On their way to the outpost, the magician girl had collected all her confidence and started talking to Seth. He felt slightly bad for them, but he did not dare to take off his armor. He had a bit of uncanny luck when it came to meeting field bosses on Earth. After some small talk, she calmed down and they talked about what happened after the world went haywire. He didn't reveal much about himself and the girl didn't dare to ask. He appreciated hearing news about what happened in Earth in general. He had been stuck in a flood for the most part and didn't really have a way to get news. The girl could also only really tell him about City Y, City B, and City D. These districts were relatively close and were not instantly wiped out by a catastrophe like City A was. The situation afterward sounded quite chaotic at first, but people managed to adapt. This didn't mean that survival was easy. Beta and Epsilon both bordered the sea and had to resist the invasion of a maritime empire on top of the randomly opening portals and dungeons. Delta, the most central city of Earth and originally seat of the world government, was located in the mountain range that split the continent into west and east. They had to deal with the volcanic activities and the constant invasion of demons. While City Y and City B kept their autonomy, City D swore allegiance to the Krna Empire to deal with the demon threat and the volcano. Many who did not agree evacuated to the other two districts close by. The Krna Empire made a non-aggression pact with the demons and used magic to calm and control the volcano. Delta was now split between the demons, humans, and the Krna Empire. This was not a bad situation if compared to what they were told by refugees from other districts. Allegedly City T, situated on a big subcontinent, was completely overrun by the Maritime Empire, and City G, Gamma, had become a war zone between the followers of Zarkan and some empire of the undead. Seth was more concerned about the gods at the moment than about the global situation. Was the host of many maybe a god? What had Seth done to get that person's interest? The girls became slightly concerned when he suddenly fell silent, thinking about this matter. Seth didn't mull long over it, nothing changed. He needed to find a safe place to craft his equipment, and maybe he could find a system church in City Y to send his friends a letter and tell them that he was okay. At least he was convinced that he was okay for now. The gear situation in Earth seemed abysmal. There were even idiots that counted on bone growths and skin flaps like some animals. The drops were trash, too. The materials were not even uncommon and their inventories only had gyptum. Their only worth was their souls. Wow, he already sounded like a villain or something. He didn't really dislike that. Anyway, Seth felt that he had made the right decision to go to Aura to learn. Now he could build a monopoly with high-quality weapons and armor. How much further until we reach the outpost? Seth asked because they had been walking for 2 hours already. This time it was the timid priest girl that finally found her courage to speak. And not far. Just a little more, she said with a stutter. They had been leading the way so Seth didn't get a chance to see, but it seemed like she was about to cry. Maybe she and that armored guy were in a relationship? Had she been holding back ever since they started walking? By the way, there are surprisingly few monsters on this road. Could there be something very dangerous that keep them away with its presence? The mage girl looked at him confused. No. This road is regularly patrolled by adventurers from our cities. Since communications broke down, it became important to keep the land routes safe for travel. Can't you send letters via the system church? Most people lack the money to use that service. And many people distrust that church. Who ensures they don't read our mail? Seth nodded. It was already hard for people from the information age to regress to the medieval ages. How were they supposed to trust some foreign organization with their mail and money? They had no way to hold the system church liable if something happened. Seth had more than enough time to get used to it. I understand the distrust, but what do you mean by expensive? Isn't it just a few silver coins? The girls almost stumbled. Just a few silver coins. He looked at their equipment and remembered the young man. Maybe the people of Earth had a lot harder time making money and that's why their equipment was so poor? Oh, I'm sorry. To talk about money in front of poor people. He said jokingly with a sardonic smile. It was a shame they could not see it because of the helmet. The two girls blushed and looked away, refusing to talk with him. At least he managed to distract the healer girl for a bit. An hour later they finally reached the outpost. It looked a lot different from what Seth had expected. He had spent over half a year in a fantasy world and had gotten used to stone walls fortified with magic circles and sigils. Seeing an outpost built like a modern military base with trenches, barbed wire and electric fences seemed really alien to him now. Especially when the soldiers wore knight outfits. The two guards were clad in a mix of plate and mail armor and armed with long spears. All if it was common steel and looked like it was from a low-level apprentice. Seth was not a master yet, but he had become good enough to judge works like this. The mage girl greeted the guard in a friendly manner, they seemed to know each other. The men flinched when their eyes fell on the almost 2-meter-tall black knight that followed. They had expected the amicable young man, but instead, their heart fell seeing this intimidating figure. The girls showed some kind of paper and explained what had happened and how they met Seth. They were friendly enough to omit what he had done to the Zarkists and their friend. It might be trouble if people knew that he knew how to kill those guys once and for all. It wasn't because he cautioned them not to talk about it. No. Though it might be a good advertisement, later on, he didn't want the attention until he finished his preparation. Can you identify yourself? Do you have any papers on your person that can prove your identity? Papers? Really? Didn't they have a status checker or something? How come that a modern world like theirs suddenly felt so much like the Boons? He took off the helmet to show his face and looked into his inventory to find a proof of identity. Does this work? He asked and handed the man his adventurer card. You are with the Adventurer Guild? B rank? S. Seth Smith, is that you? And your class is? At first the man was astounded and then a dumb smile floated on his face. Yeah, I'm Seth Smith. And I am a blacksmith. Haha funny. Now give me back my card, please. Ding. The Lord of the Red Land is observing you. What? What had he done this time? Another god or whatever was watching him. Did the host of many host a watch party of his live stream or something? Shouldn't God be rare? Why did they gather on him? Maybe his aura that attracted field bosses leveled up and now attracted full-fledged gods? Chapter 146. Outpost. Oh, sorry. Please come in, the soldier said. He gave back his card and the guard made way for the group to enter. The inside was nothing imposing or surprising. A crowd of people, a few barracks and training space, the usual stuff. The most important thing was probably the flag of Y City displayed everywhere. This meant that they had already entered the district. They couldn't be far from actual civilization now. Please excuse me. With that the priest girl rushed off to one of the barracks. Her and Tom were a couple, the mage girl said matter-of-factly. Seth only nodded. He didn't really care. It followed an uncomfortable silence. What that over there? Seth asked to break the silence and pointed at a blackboard with a crowd of people in front of it. It's the blackboard, the leadership posts quests there, and registered adventurers can acknowledge. The leadership, not the guild. The leadership or the government of a district. Why would the government take over handing out quests instead of leaving it to the guild? I really wonder where you have lived the last few months. Do you really think the officials would leave such a profitable and powerful business in the hands of a foreign organization like the Adventurer Guild? It was again a trust thing. Well, also a power thing. Do they at least leave the management of the dungeons to the guild? Well, duh. But I could bet they wouldn't if they could revive the dead themselves. True that. Only people registered with the guild could be resurrected at a guild branch if they died in a dungeon. It was unique to the guild unless the government managed to strike a deal with the dungeon god. How far is the city from here? The mage girl pondered for a moment. You can reach the outskirts in an hour or two on foot and the next satellite city in 2. It would probably take 2 days to get to Y City itself. But there is a transporter every few days that can take you there. On the way, they had talked about safety within the district's territory. Monsters kept invading from random portals, but dungeons were more or less managed, which made the journey within the district a lot safer. The centers of the satellite cities and especially Y City were the safest, with most combat class fighters and their guilds having their seats there. Y City also had the only branch of the system church within the district. Since Y City Center had safety and the church, he decided to wait for the transporter. After he reached the satellite city, he would not risk staying in some rinky-dink military camp. I will be leaving for the satellite city then. You are leaving? But. I thank you for showing me the way, but that's all it was. I have to contact my own people. Then, let me come with you, she suddenly demanded. Why would I do that? He looked at her in surprise as she puffed her cheeks. How could you shoo away a cute girl just like that? I owe you my life. Is it that weird that I want to repay you? Seth bowed down and took a good look at her face. She was barely 1.60 m tall and her face was indeed quite cute. She was also well endowed, which was accentuated by her tight robe. She blushed as Seth was so blatantly checking her out. I might have a way for you to repay me, he said, nodding. The girl blushed furiously. It almost looked as if she was steaming. I will do anything I can. Her hands were fidgeting and her eyes kept shifting from side to side. Great. You will become the poster girl of my new shop, once I open it. Her nervousness instantly died, she seemed almost lifeless. Your shop? Yes, I'm a blacksmith. Did you forget? Obviously, I would open a shop sooner or later. At that time, you will become our poster girl. Imagine how many guys will come to my shop if I have a cute girl in high-quality armor do the advertising. I will get equipment. Her eyes sparkled in excitement. She kept swinging between sadness and joy like a metronome. Well, of course. For advertisement purposes. Do you need some time to talk to your friend? Seth gestured towards the barracks where the priest girl had vanished. See, can I? Sure. Go, I will wait. Are you sure you want to take a burden with you? The lich started talking the moment they were alone. We should be safe from here on. And if I can't deal with the situation, I can always summon you. You should be able to take care of some burdens. Seth used the time to stroll around and find a place to get some warm food. He took off the helmet and the cuirass to weaken the set effect. When he finally found a place and entered the canteen, they only accepted city credits. He belatedly realized that he was rich in system currency, but had no earth money on his person. It was the smell of the food that lightened his mood. The food smelled unappetizing and flavorless. This soothed his regret, as the rations he had brought seemed more appetizing than the freshly cooked food here. Was it because it was a canteen and the food was not as good in general? Everything was okay if that was the case. The worse option was that the food in Namiya was delicious thanks to the skills of the chef class. He had gotten used to that food. It might become hard to find palatable food on Earth if that was the case. His rations had just become that much more important. Maybe he should become a chef with his second class. He imagined the sheer amount of different ingredients a chef would have to deal with and decided not to. 2 crafting classes might be a little too much for him. Here you were, he heard the voice of the mage girl. She approached from behind. I almost didn't recognize you without the armor and helmet, she said out of breath. Behind her was the priest girl, her red teary eyes hidden behind a curtain of blonde curls. Can we bring her, too? After what happened to Tom, I can't just leave her behind. Seth inspected the priest girl. She had a good figure and a passable face. She might have the potential to be a clerk, so he agreed to let her tag along. With that, he had already staffed his shop, before even finding a location. Something seemed wrong with the order, but who cares? The priest girl's face lit up slightly. Arim, maybe we should introduce ourselves? I'm Mary. Jane, the mage girl had mentioned her name on the way, but Mary, the priest girl, had not really taken part in their conversation. So, they once again introduced themselves to each other again. To his surprise, Mary and Jane had already packed their stuff and were ready to leave with Seth. It looked like they were in a hurry themselves. Jane, do you know where I can buy a map? More importantly, can I exchange system currency for credits somewhere? Why is everything here still using credits anyway? Hey? Are there no shops where you came from? You can just look over there. It was not some new system feature he had not seen before, but an official shop under government control that bought materials, items, and currency. In Aura one would visit the guild or the merchants to sell materials, here everything was managed by the city. This was a lot less apocalyptic than he had expected. The shop was small and run down with a fenced-off counter. It felt like a state-owned pawn shop. "What is it?" the clerk spit out. He was a rough-looking man with a stubbly face and a cigarette in the corner of his mouth. He didn't even look up from his reading material. Seth felt disillusioned. Why was the customer service here worse than in some medieval fantasy setting? "Hi, can I exchange money here?" "What's with that question? Is this your first time in a shop?" "We buy materials, items, and system currency for credit." The man became quieter and finally stopped talking after he finally looked up from the magazine he was reading. The man seemed to have an appraisal skill and he fell silent after seeing Seth in his armor. "Good, I want to exchange some silver for credits." "You don't sell anything here, do you?" "I need a map." Oh, sure." Seth found the exchange rate printed on a poster in the back behind the man and was very surprised. 1 silver exchanged for roughly 1,000 credits. This meant the 1 bronze was 10 credit. Was there inflation or something? Why were credits suddenly so easy to make? Seth put 20 silver on the counter. The clerk's eyes bulged when he saw this huge amount of silver. He hurriedly took it, checked it, and stored it away. In exchange, he put 2 bundles of money on the counter which added up to 20,000 credits. This equaled the money he made monthly from his apartment building. Now he just needed to pull out some small change to get it. He took the bundles of money and felt their weight. How long had it been since he last saw paper money? It seemed like civilization had not yet managed to recover the banking system and fell back to using hard cash. The guy also added a map of Y City and the current region of Koku City, the closest satellite city. "Please have a nice day," the guy spoke in a forced friendly tone and gave him a strained smile. Chapter 147. Koku City. Shop. The clerk hurriedly rummaged through a drawer below the counter and pulled out a mobile radio. It looked slightly modified with a magic rune carved in the side. "Sir?" "Yes." "No, I'm not slacking, sir." I know, sir. It is important, sir. Just now I saw a man decked out in items I could not appraise. Sir knows I can appraise everything up to uncommon. All his gear must be rare or above." "You didn't offend him, right?" the man on the phone asked worriedly. No. He exchanged some currency and I gave him a map of Y and Koku, sir. I think Koku will be his next destination. He just left the shop." "You did well in calling fast. You might get a bonus this month." With that, the voice ended the call and left the guy with a smile. Even so, he had to humble himself. Headquarters always paid well for reliable info in this crisis. Seth felt relieved holding an actual map in his hands. He had only been in Epsilon once before on vacation with his parents. But at that time, they had visited a city on the coast. Koku City was located on the border in the direction of the central continent, so pretty much the opposite side. Remembering that vacation with parents slightly ached his heart, but he also found that he really appreciated the universal translation. Y City district spoke a completely different language and he would have had it a lot harder trying to stumble through conversations with his broken knowledge of the Earth universal language. He opened the map of Epsilon or Y City for short. It was the district located almost directly south of the center and split into 14 smaller administrative units of satellite cities. Some of these regions were X'd out, one of them was where he had been for vacation. Ding! New information acquired. Would you like to integrate the information into your map? Y/N. This surprised him. When he chose yes, his map opened on its own and the previously grayed out area was filled with a picture of the map in his hands. Now, the map looked like a mix of 3D model and an image. The places he had been to were a detailed model, while the rest of Epsilon was filled with an image of the map. Had he known that he could integrate analog maps into his skill, he would have bought more maps. The outpost was located outside of the district's borders and as Jane had said, they walked for about an hour before they reached the metropolitan area. How much had he missed this view? Giant skyscrapers filling the skyline of the grey megacity, covering everything in his sight like a dirty grey carpet. It lacked the yellowish smog screen, but the landscape of concrete and glass still warmed his heart more than he had expected. No more forests, caves, deserts, or swamps for him. He even started to silently hum. Asphalt roads, take me home to the place I belong. Concrete jungle, fatty fast foods, take me home, asphalt road. Thanks to Orpheus' voice, the text didn't matter. It sounded good enough to enchant the two girls and make them sing along despite the weird text. Except for some obvious combat damages on the buildings and road, the city itself looked like a completely normal modern megapolis. The pedestrians were the ones that made it look weird. A big part of the crowd was wearing generic-looking fantasy gear, armors, robes, and hats. When Seth heard there would be a transporter, he had thought that cars were running again and she meant a kind of bus. He gave up on that idea after seeing the roads being used by people riding mounts and beasts pulling carts. It also explained why the air was so clean. It was not a weird idea to think that cars would be working again, electricity was working too, after all. Jane didn't know the specifics, but apparently, there were classes like a variation of the dwarfs' engineers. These people had now found a way to recover some of their original energy sources and were also researching new alternatives. Seth was looking forward to the future. Hopefully, those people could bring back the era of gaming. Maybe he could relocate Finn, Mina, and the party to Earth once he secured his footing here. He had often thought of introducing the ferry to the world of gaming. He should have enough money to shoulder the destroyed screen and controllers if the ferry lost. If he was lucky, he could even get Marn to immigrate after his training. Depending on the equipment situation in the city, they could even make a lot with Marn's current skills. How good would it be if he could leave everything to Marn and play games all day? These were dreams of a far future. Right now he would first have to make sure that this world was even safe and look for a good place to stay before he could even plan to get them here. Seth took off his helmet and they mingled in the crowd. Another hour later they reached the bounds of the actual Koku city center and looked for a hotel to stay in for the next few days. Seth had money and he didn't plan on economizing with this small change. He was actually glad that he had only used silver coins back at the shop. Imagine he had pulled out several gold coins with each being worth 100k or more in that dirty little shop. It was the girls who recommended an expensive hotel. They were originally from here and knew the place. 300 credits a night was expensive, but it couldn't faze Seth at all. If you converted the currencies, he had been staying at places that cost several thousand a night. And it wasn't like he paid too much. The hotel was a bona fide luxury hotel with pools, a spa, and a massive suite. It was better than any inn he had visited during his travel. It would definitely do until the transport came. After realizing that they could not mean a bus when they said transporter, he had asked the girls what exactly it was. The answer was a kind of train that was not bound to tracks. It was one of the early inventions of this new era. Powered with monster cores, it was a piece of magi tech that roughly combined modern engineering and magic. It was a heavily armored transport vehicle of the military and supposed to deliver and transport all kinds of cargo and supplies between the cities. They also transported a small number of passengers for a hefty sum of money. Strong adventurers could travel for free if they agreed to help in case of a monster attack or a raid. It reminded Seth slightly of the age of stagecoaches and railways, just that both were somehow combined. Seth enjoyed the evening with a long visit in the spa and a good meal in the hotel's restaurant. He was glad that his impression of food from the canteen at the outpost did not translate to the food here. Food still tasted great, even if the chef had no corresponding class. All stress left him when he finally returned to his room and laid down on the soft warm bed. Before he fell asleep, he opened his inventory. Besides the weapons and items he had worked on most recently in his rations, there were the boxes he had snatched from Tord in a hurry. Since he wanted to finish his own equipment and maybe start a new life based on his profession, he needed to organize his resources. He had a quiet minute now and decided to use it productively. Taking out all the boxes, he started to sort and order the materials. It was a bummer he had mostly grabbed those boxes in the front. Some of the boxes were not full, but he still got his money's worth. Everything combined, he now had 30 ingots of dwarven copper, 33 ingots of mithril, 42 ingots of magic steel, 17 ingots of dark steel, and a thick sheet of leather from one of the boxes. He had thrown 200 gold at the dwarf and he might have even made some profit. A lot, in fact. Aside from these, he also had a stack high-quality steel, the fire glass, cernum, and dusk iron, and the materials from the snakes and the wyvern. He judged that it was more than enough to make his equipment and start a shop. The only thing he was not sure about was the piece of leather. Hide of the white bull, crafting material, rare. This is the leather of a white bull. They have a deep connection with the earth and life. These beasts are known for their gentle and calm nature. Killing them angers the land, and any material harvested from a murdered bull will bear a curse. This was a dilemma. How would he know whether this was cursed or not? He could show it to a tailor, but were there even tailors skilled enough to appraise this on Earth? He could just send a letter to Tord and ask about it. He just needed to hope that Tord didn't want it back. After checking and sorting everything, he finally fell asleep. Chapter 148. Mark Baker. Seth was fighting a huge group of armed attackers. Arrows and magic showered him, but simply bounced off his armor. Like an invincible giant, he strode through the enemy ranks and slew them with his burning sword. Knock knock. A knocking on the door woke Seth from his nice dream. Knock knock knock. He struggled to get off the big soft bed and he crawled towards the door. I'm coming. Stop knocking already. He finally reached the door and ripped it open. Before him stood a tall slim man in a streamlined suit and combed back hair. He looked quite handsome and stylish and wore a pair of delicate rimmed glasses he just adjusted. His eyes behind the glasses looked at Seth up and down and stopped at his waist. I appreciate the view, but this seems a little inappropriate for our first meeting. Maybe you could. Embarrassed, Seth realized that his bathrobe was not closed and his visitor was appreciating his best piece. He hurriedly bound his bathrobe correctly. I'm glad you enjoyed the view, but I don't swing that way. That's a shame. Anyway. Hello, my name is Mark Baker and I'm an executive manager of Y City's Special Defense Department. Special Defense Department? What is that and why did they directly send a manager? Seth had never heard of a Special Defense Department. Did they come up with that after the apocalypse? Yes. Maybe you don't know about us. The SDD is in charge of monitoring and dealing with special existences, especially those who appeared after the apocalypse. Oh, and why did a manager of that place suddenly appear in my hotel room? Maybe we could talk about this inside your room? It's not quite appropriate to talk about in this kind. Sure, give me just a second. Seth closed the room door and threw away the bathrobe. He used Clean a spell from Lifestyle Magic. The skill was similar to Ultimate Translation and was set on Leave Max. There were no ranks or level up, he simply got a list of spells to use. Clean simply cleaned his body of any dirt. It was not as satisfying as a real bath or shower, but it did the job. After cleaning up, Seth equipped his golden shirt, pants, and gambeson, and the dark night boots. This combination was almost as comfortable as normal clothing but held more defense than uncommon plate armor. If the guy tried anything funny, Seth felt confident to be able to deal with it. Only after wearing his accessories and token, he opened the door. Mark couldn't help but widen his eyes when he saw Seth opening the door again in his dazzling outfit. It took him a moment before he could speak again. He harumphed and spoke. This really isn't necessary. I'm not here to offend you. Oh really? Then come in and sit down. Mark stepped past Seth and took a seat on the big white couch in the middle of the living room. Seth sat on the two-seater to the side. So why does an executive manager of the SDD visit me in my hotel room? Yes. Straight to the point. One of our employees reported a man dressed in a complete set of armor with a rating above uncommon. By the way, he described it as black plate, not a golden cloth. This was the perfect opportunity for Seth to show off his full armor, but he didn't. The bait was way too obvious. So, he just signaled the man to keep talking with an interested look, completely ignoring the implied question. Well, and the reason I'm here is that items rated uncommon are still very hard to find, but you are decked out in rare items. The only possibility would be that you have a reliable source or you are someone from a different world. In both cases, we would welcome your cooperation. This is an important matter. We could not leave it to some low-ranking member, that is why I am here. Seth nodded. It made sense that he was very conspicuous with rare-rated armor if people already had a hard time getting uncommon stuff. Well, I can assure you that I am from Earth. I am originally from City A. My name is Seth Smith. Ding. The Lord of the Red Land is watching you. What? Why again? He didn't have the time to think about it too much as Mark continued talking. He made a conflicted expression. I hope you understand, that we can't check that. Nobody we sent in the direction of C City and A City ever returned. All we know is that there is a giant forest growing. Seth flinched when he heard that the forest even covered C City. That meant the whole southeastern corner of the continent was covered in that cursed forest, but this was not his problem right now. The current problem was that Seth didn't really want someone to appraise him. Although being an Orihuma would be the strongest proof that he was from Earth, he didn't want people to know his skill ranks. Things might get really annoying then. Once they knew his abilities, it might not even matter that he was a native. There was only one option. He thought for a moment and came up with a lie. Well, you will just have to believe me then. As for a reliable way to gain items, I was very lucky. I got a few of these things from a dungeon. They open an auction interface where you can purchase any item you might want. I was able to grind my way up until I had a fairly good armor. Surprised, the SDD official looked at the silver stick. For a moment he feared it was a flashy thing that would erase his memories. But nothing happened to Mark. Unfortunately, this is my last one. I was looking for civilization to find a way and get more. I could give this one to you since it won't be of much use to me right now. Of course, it's not for free. Seth rather sold off the portable one-time access to the auction house, than having to deal with the government. What's your price? He looked at the thing with sparkling eyes. He totally swallowed his lie. What did he want for it? Seth thought about it. I want identification papers that work on Earth. 200k credits and. Could you give me a ride to Y City? Mark looked at him surprised. Those were some surprisingly doable things for access to high-grade items. The SDD had a few working vehicles that were not open to public use, and Seth didn't even ask for ownership, just a ride. Those were very sensible conditions from Mark's point of view. Seth just stated what he needed at the moment. He didn't know that his price was cheap, and it pleased the official. Deal. I will have your papers ready in a few hours. Same with the money and the ride. This was the advantage when one was talking directly to the manager. He could make the decisions directly. Great. I will give the thing to you then. Make sure you have loads of system cash on you if you plan to use it right then and there. Good stuff is expensive. I will stay in the hotel until you come back. Mark nodded and left. Seth sighed after he closed the door. This could have ended worse. Seth had no intention to go against the government or something, simply because he had no idea about the power levels in Earth. Seth had spent a long time in a different world and actually had an easy time since all his stats were double than his level suggested. But the people of Earth had just as much time, and they had the same inherent buffs. He had no advantage except for his items, but this did not guarantee that he could beat someone with strong combat skills. Especially if their level was comparable. Except pyrokinesis, he severely lacked attack skills. The easiest way to make up for that was reaching level 50 as soon as possible and get a combat class. The other way was making special items. Like his bow or the robe he made for Finn, weapons had options that had a similar effect to skills or granted them when worn. That meant he needed to find more above common rated souls. He actually had the hope that he could find more on Earth than on Nemea. In all his time in Nemea he had only found one. He had found two during his first few days after the apocalypse. They were also often connected to a quest. Maybe he had to act in a way that triggered more quests? But then again, he didn't get a quest to help the girls. Even so, it would have been the prime opportunity. What other connection was there? Maybe he had to look at places with lots of tragic deaths. Or look for the really depraved people and monsters to kill. The last thought was based on the orc that gave him an uncommon soul. He could easily increase the power of a soul, but it was hard to increase the rating. He actually had no idea how he could increase the ranking of souls. When his thoughts came to this point, he decided to stop there. There was nothing to gain in mulling over things he could not solve at the moment. It was more important to go and tell the girls about their change in plans. Chapter 149. City Y. Seth knocked on the door of the guest room, where the girls slept tonight. He could hear scrambling and rummaging in the room. He knocked on the door and all movements in the room stopped. Hey, get up and ready. We are leaving soon. I got us a ride. The inside stayed silent. He was worried. He really didn't decide to open the door to maybe get a view of girls in underwear. I'm coming in. Well, he could say that this was 100% the scene he had expected. The girls were only dressed in their underwear, but they were currently wrestling some guy in dark attire. You know, if you want male company, you should have gotten your own room. If you had asked nicely, I would even have taken the role of your partner. But inviting some stranger into my room is really rude, you know. See, can you stop joking and help us? Jane called in distress. Seth used observation and the guy and accidentally also on the girls. Bob James leave 14. Class, thief. Jane Mays leave 15. Class, apprentice sorceress. Mary Mays LV13. Class, apprentice priest. This showed the difference in attribute distribution between caster classes and physical classes. It took 2 casters to physically overcome a single thief. Something like a knight could probably throw these girls around like ragdolls. In comparison, the girls probably had higher intelligence and willpower than even Seth, without his armor. He stepped beside them and grabbed the thief's neck with one hand and lifted him up. He proceeded to press him against the wall with his feet off the ground. "Okay, Bob. What are you doing in my suite? Ugh, let me down. Who do you think you are? Do you feel strong just because you can?" Seth held the thief with his right hand and clad his left in pale fire. "Listen here. I just woke up and found someone having fun with my property, I mean employees. Talk or die, those are your option." Seth was not really serious, but threats cost nothing. The thief's pupils shrunk when he saw the bright flame that was emitting a terrible heat, even at this distance. "No, no, no, I talk. They owe the boss money. I only came to collect a debt after I heard they were back in town. I didn't know this was your room, or that they were your property." Seth's hand got tighter around his neck. "Don't call them property, you scum. Humans are no objects. They are my employees. Yes, employees, employees. I misspoke. But I only came because my boss told me to collect the debt. I didn't mean to offend anyone." Seth turned to the girls, without letting go. "Do you guys owe someone money?" "No. It was Tom's department. He got a loan to buy that armor. It has nothing to do with us." Mary's face got dark when Tom was mentioned. "You heard her. His loan is the party's loan," the thief argued. "The dude is dead and your money is gone. Accept it and stop bothering grieving people. Tell your boss that the information was wrong. Make up some story about how you got info on their death because Tom actually is. Deal? Why should I? Deal or death? Do you really want to die here? Deal. Good boy." Seth kept the thief hanging in the air until he threw him out of his suite. "Do you really think he will keep his end of the deal?" Jane asked unconvinced. "Doesn't matter. We are out of this city in a few hours." The 2 girls had followed him into the living room. Seth appreciated the view of the girls in rather revealing underwear standing in the room until they followed his gaze and noticed it themselves. "Perv." Jane covered herself and furiously blushed. Mary blushed even harder and followed in as they ran back to their room to get dressed. Seth was not really bothered by this. He went down to eat in the hotel's restaurant. Sometime later the girls also came to eat and went back to the room again afterward. Several hours later Mark joined him at his table. The official had a satisfied smile on his face. He ignored the mountains of emptied dishes that filled the table and squeezed an envelope on the little free space on the table. "Your papers." He squeezed in another thicker envelope. "Your money. A car is waiting outside for you and your entourage." Seth paused eating as he watched the official. "You work really fast. Executive management. Well, I'm about done with my meal anyway. I will go call the girls." A few minutes later he arrived with his employees at the entrance and checked out from the hotel. Mark stood beside a bulky-looking ATV and waited for them. He reached out his hand waiting for something. You want it now? I originally wanted to wait until we reached Y City, but how could the world work without some trust? Okay, here." With that, he put the small silver one-time use auction interface into the manager's hand. "Don't forget to prepare lots of cash before using it." "I will, thanks." They entered the car and left Koku City. "Yes, I acquired the item." "What?" "Yes, I will bring it to Y City." "Yes, I will bring Koku City's reserve." He ended the call with a sigh. Had he known that he would also have to go to Y City, he would have just joined Seth. It would have been a chance to become closer with a strong potential ally. Mark just hoped they would not meet some of the more ambitious officials in the capital. He wasn't worried about Seth as much as he was about the consequences of offending him. It was one of the reasons that Y City had complicated relationships with other worldly factions like the Krana Empire. The officials' approach, in the beginning, was unrefined and forceful, to say it in a nice way. It is a weird thing, people become really offended and hostile if you try to rob and swindle their, or their subordinates, items. The approach worked well if you were in a position of power. The lesson they learned was that they were not exactly in a position of power. Even with increased stats and proficiency gain, they still severely lacked the knowledge to contest with these people. Some, like Mark, learned that it was better to simply deal respectfully with all of them. Trust was one of the few solid currencies one could garner in this chaotic world. It was a shame that he knew that he was only one of few who understood this. Say, how did you manage to make a car like this? Seth asked the stoic driver. He asked because this was no just a normal car like the ones before the apocalypse. He could feel magic power coursing through the whole thing. It was obviously powered with magic. Apparently, most modern technologies had lost their function in the central continent, like after an EMP or something. This was a peculiar difference to Seth's memory. After all, his phone still worked fine and he used a bike to escape back then. He didn't know about the bike, but phones definitely didn't survive in areas like Y City. Also, the girls had told him that people had just begun researching how to adapt modern technology to the system era. This car seemed a little too advanced for that to be true. On the other hand, this was the military. The military always had the best and newest toys. HRMPH. I will only tell you this because it is not classified information and you are a guest of Mr. Baker. There are classes like technomancers and mechanics who can create magi tech based on technology. From our interactions with the Empire, we know that these are a unique trait of technologically advanced worlds. Unique too. Does that mean there are also gunners and stuff like that? Seth asked, intrigued. But the driver only smirked and stayed silent. Chapter 150. Y City, 2. What would have taken maybe 2 days on foot, was easily conquered with the cars in about 2 hours. It was enough time for Seth to get a good look at the city. The buildings became bigger and more imposing the closer they came to Y City, the center of the district. The great metropolitan area around them was marred with rubble and craters of fights, but still mostly intact. The magical ATV really attracted attention, as it was the only working car on the streets. Other travelers were mostly going on foot, some rode their mounts or were using repurposed cars as carts pulled by mounts or tame beasts. The first distinct sign that they had entered the capital was a steel wall, that formed a barrier between Y City and the rest of the territory. Seth could make out several incantations and magic circles on this wall. It had been enchanted and would probably be able to withstand the attacks of weaker monsters. However, Seth was not an expert in this, as it was the domain of enchanters. Y City, as the center of a huge city association, had the highest number of high-rise buildings and skyscrapers. If looked at from the air, the big towers and glass facades looked like a crystal protruding out of the surrounding cityscape. The car stopped at the feet of one of the medium-sized skyscrapers. This is the SDD headquarters. You will have to find your own way from here, the driver said. He pressed a button and the doors sprung open on their own. Seth and his employees left the car and it drove around the corner, entering an underground garage. What now? Jane turned to Seth and asked. Seth looked at the map. Let's go to church. Do you want to pray or something? The System Church. I need to write some letters. The System Church was quite a bit different from the ones in Nemea. They had bought a whole skyscraper that now belonged to them. They entered the lobby. Different from the row of counters, they found a receptionist. How may I help you? Hi, I'm a lay member. I need to get in contact with some people abroad. After touching a crystal for verification, he left the girls in the lobby and entered the elevator. They had a whole floor dedicated to communications. Are you Seth? He was greeted by another old man in a red robe. He was tall and lanky. His long face was cleanly shaven, framed by long white hair. He was like the complete opposite of Simon, except for his aura. He seemed just as kind as Simon when Seth first met him. Yeah, that's my name. Simon asked us to keep an eye out for you, in case you turn up at one of our locations. Who would have thought you would come to one of our main branches, he said with a smile. At least Simon took a little responsibility for throwing him into some random wormhole. I'm glad you are alive. I heard that you wish to contact some people. Come over here. We have a room where you can write your messages in peace. Simon might turn up later. The room was like a normal small office. There was a table and chairs. Seth sighed and sat down. He started writing letters to Finn, Mina, and Tord, describing what had happened, telling them that he was okay in his current situation. He also tried to come up with plans for the future. The most immediate thing he wanted to do was obviously to find a quiet place and forge his equipment. Next would be to look for a safe location for a fixed workshop and shop. If he managed to build a safe place, he hinted that he would not hate if they came over and joined him. Of course, only if they wanted. It would be quite nice if civilization managed to recover and they all could live here together. When he finished writing the letter, he sealed them with wax. What the people of Earth didn't know was that the way stamp gave a magical seal to the letter, if supplied with mana. If the seal was broken, it would mark the letter as read and the receiver would know that someone had read it. Seth. I'm glad you are okay. It was Simon that greeted him as he left the office. His counterpart stood beside him with a relaxed smile. Seth still slightly resented Simon for throwing him into that tunnel, but he somewhat understood that it was necessary. They talked about what Seth had gone through after coming back, and then Seth finally got an explanation of what even happened. Starta village, where we met, was attacked and raided by one of our enemies. They follow some really radical war god, the bringer of chains. Like the name of the god suggests, they are really into the whole make people submit business and slavery. I think you can guess why they would invade new chaotic worlds. But what has that to do with me? Well. They found out about you from the records in Starta. Now Krana Empire, or more specifically the System Church, and the Theocracy of Chains are diametrically opposed to each other. The System God wants Orihumas to make free decisions and struggle. But their goal is to forcefully enslave people. In their opinion, you joining us is stealing from them. He explained that it would not have been a problem, since they would have no way to locate him in the other world. That was until some demon probably sold the info of an Orihuma to them and they added one and one together. But I'm safe for now, right? It is not like they can find me here among all the other people. Well, yet. Just be careful. Their goal is still to conquer and enslave the people in this world. Although, they will have a hard time moving on Earth. The old man said with a grin. Apparently, the only gateway the Theocracy could open was close to the location of Starta. Since Starta was gone, the forest would restart its growth and soon devour the rest of the southeastern corner of the continent. Simon could not help but grin at the thought that those damn angels would have to deal with stuff like the hanging tree. He had a hard time getting away with his life and built quite a resentment to those messengers of the bringer of chains. All the talks of gods made Seth remember something important. He was pretty sure he could trust Simon at this point. Hey, Simon, he whispered. There is something we need to talk about. Alone would be best, he said and looked at the other priest. He didn't know that guy well enough to trust him. Oh, sure. They entered the small office again and Simon was so courteous to cast an isolating barrier. All this talk about gods reminded me about something. The girls I met told me about gods choosing champions in our world. What is that about? Oh, you know, technically God choosing champions is something very normal. It's just that it occurs a lot more often in worlds newly added to the Pathworks. I mean, the reason is clear, right? There are many bored gods that just laze around in their eternal life. Watching mortals is their only pastime. When the system god opens a world, it means that it's an interesting one, so the gods flock to it. Their reasons for choosing a champion really just depend on the gods. I had 3 notifications of entities watching me since I returned. Are those gods? Simon looked surprised at Seth. You barely entered the world for a few days and got the attention of several gods? You really are a lucky bastard. Simon said with a grin. Don't worry about it. Best case you get a considerable boost in strength. Worst case they will ignore you again. Just take it as a blessing. Chapter 151. Y City, 3. Her hands were drenched in blood. Tears left trails in the dirt and blood that covered her face. Ash's trembling hand reached for her mouth. A long tongue stretched out from a small mouth and licked the fresh blood and bits of meat off the long sharp nails protruding from her fingers. A devilish smile crept on her face, but her eyes were disgusted with herself. Ding! You have killed Stacy Q. Leave 23. You have earned experience. Ding! You have killed Edward Sullen. Leave 24. You have earned experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now leave 25. It was over. She had finally killed her sister and Edward, her sister's boyfriend. And now she could not stop herself from gorging on their bodies like a beast. It all started with her attaining the Rakshasa class. She gained skills that improved her strength, agility, and endurance far beyond her level. She became even stronger in the darkness, and there were other unbelievable skills like illusion magic and transformation skills. She became also immune to diseases, poison, or curses. And to top it all, she got the ability to kill her enemies, the followers of Zarkan. Her new claws could inflict permanent wounds on their ever-regrowing flesh and take their lives once and for all. But everything in the world came at a price. Like a vampire that needed human blood to survive, she needed to feast on human flesh. It was a terrible price, but one she was willing to take in exchange for the ability to exact revenge. Their encounters with the Zarkists became a lot less dangerous. With her new class, she was immune to the curse. And the hateful enemies were her source of sustenance. At first, she hid it from her companions. She only told them about her gains, not the cost. She would smuggle away part of the bodies after their fight and eat them alone. It was disgusting. Human flesh tasted bitter and the texture of raw bloody meat in her mouth and when it slid down her throat made her gag. In these moments she wanted nothing more than to vomit it out again. Without Heart of Steel she might not have persisted. Despite her disgust, the gains were obvious. She kept growing stronger and they did not need to fear the Zarkists. They even started hunting them. It also helped that the main force of the Zarkic cult was distracted fighting other enemies. Everything went well and they even managed to organize at first. She finally decided to open up to Stacy and Edward. They were shocked at first, but accepted her decision and supported her. It was her fault. No, it was their fault. Those despicable, repulsive vermin who dared to call themselves human. Someone had eavesdropped on them. The next thing that happened was her group being ambushed by a huge number of Zarkists. They had been sold out. No good deed goes unpunished. She had helped people and in exchange, she lost what little of her family was left. Her sister and Edward had turned into these disgusting monsters. It had taken ages to recover her strength and track them down. She could not let her family exist as such beasts. She had ended their suffering with her own hands. The tears subsided once her hunger was quenched. Once she had buried the two her head finally cleared up. Where was she even? Why City? And that's why I want to borrow a floor. Seth ended his pitch. Originally, he had thought of renting or buying a location in Y City, but he was unsure whether he would stay here. The System Church owned a whole skyscraper, if he could borrow one of the floors his problems would be solved. Simon looked to his counterpart. Samuel, this was the name of this branch's priest, nodded hesitantly. I could lend you a room for free, but a whole floor. He scratched his cheek. Even if many floors are empty right now, I can't just hand out stuff for free. You would have to pay rent. Deal, Seth answered happily. A floor was big enough to use as a living space and workshop, without disturbing anyone. And just like that Seth and his entourage started to live in the church. This had an additional advantage. If someone tried to mess with him, they would first have to mess with the System Church. Although they looked kind and amiable on the surface, they were not to be trifled with. While the girls could enjoy their free time, Seth started to work on his equipment. He knew that the skill would not be as easy to level as it had been in the past, now that he reached the journeyman rank. That's why he did not hold back on the materials he wanted to use. Seth started with some more common soul gear. He needed a huge pool of mana for what he planned to do, so he used medium-sized souls to make generic armor pieces that each raised his mana by roughly 100. With about 1000 bonus mana, he now had 1400 mana to work with. He had even consulted with Al to plan out the enchantments beforehand. She was not a blacksmith, but as an enchanter and former lich with over 200 years of experience, she was a great help when it came to meshing together the several kinds of enchantment to gain the best possible effect. While planning the most ambitious part of his new equipment, he had ordered special materials from the church. This was another thing the people of Earth didn't know or didn't want to do. The church acted as an interdimensional trader. Just like how Simon had bought weapons from Seth or how he sent goods through the church. As a lay member of the church, he could also order things at a discount. What he got was a dark, crooked, and twisted branch the length and size of his arm. Dark ghost wood, crafting material, rare. The wood of a tree that grew for over 300 years on a cursed or haunted ground. The resentment and regrets of the dead have seeped deep into the wood, coloring it black through and through. A scarce wood often used in dark rituals and curses. It had taken Seth a long time to gain knowledge of this kind of material. During his time in Aura, he realized that there were only a few ores and minerals that had an affinity with souls. Organic materials like those from monsters did a lot better in housing a soul. It was then that he realized that he should not restrict himself to the materials a blacksmith would use. Right, this was not a crafting material for a blacksmith, but it was normally used by caster classes as part of dark rituals or curses. It had cost him a hefty sum, 50 gold for this single piece of wood. Seth thought it was worth it since it would most likely have a high affinity with the vengeful soul. The reason materials like this were not generally used in blacksmithing was that they varied too much. Any tree could produce this wood as long as it meets requirements, but not all wood was fit to be used in a weapon. The price came from the fact that this branch was the wood of a 500-year-old ash that grew on a cursed battlefield. This technically made it fit to be used to make a bow. Before he made the bow, there was something he wanted to test. He brought out a pauldron from the guy who had died in the forest. It was a cheap common item from a dungeon with an enchantment that raised defense slightly. Next, he forged a similar pauldron from a small soul and carved a simple shield circuit into it. This enchantment was able to create a shield with a strength proportional to the mana supplied. It had its limits though. Seth wanted to test whether these enchantments would get in the way of each other if he infused a piece of enchanted soul equipment. He would be able to put double the number of enchantments he could put on an item like that. 4 different enchantments were close to the realm of a master. Seth infused the soul pauldron into the enchanted item and succeeded. At least nothing exploded, but there was no notification that he had finished an item. As he looked at the item with blacksmith's eyes, he could see that the now 2 options looked corrupted. Looking at the pauldron, he could see the shield circuit bleeding through, like a stain in the metal or a stigma. Then he got a failure notification. It didn't work. At least not completely. It had taken some time until it was determined a failed product. This meant that maybe in the future he would be able to find a way. He was not too disappointed in this outcome, it just reinforced his desire for higher rated souls. It was already proven that the inherent qualities of the souls did not get in the way of enchantments, while still giving and influencing the effects. Seth was glad he had tested it on a cheap Japdom instead of potentially ruining his new items. Chapter 152. Epic. Having tested that, Seth started making the bow. He used both energy circulation and the effect of Karen's Oddball in tandem to forge the crooked branch into form. It was always interesting to see the skill work its magic. When his hammer strikes hit the bark's surface, it was smoothened and flattened. It reacted much more like a metal than wood. He turned the uneven stick into a smooth uniform billet with a length of about 1 meter. The fact that not even the bark was damaged in the process, but fused into the surface and homogenized with the rest of the material, led to the billet looking like layered steel with twists and turns visible where the wood had been crooked before. At this point, Seth needed a break. This was still a rare material, and even with the combination of skill and hammer, it was hard to forge it. He was not exhausted, but he needed to be in shape for the next step. So, he went out and had a meal in the church's canteen. "Seth, there you are. I have not seen you since morning." Simon approached him as he sat down to eat. "Yeah, I started working on my equipment." "Why are you looking for me?" Simon rummaged through the pockets of his red robe and brought out an envelope. It was not from Finn or Mina, but an answer from Tord. The letter was brief, it fit the dwarf. "I'm glad you were able to safely return, Seth. That piece of leather is safe, use it to your heart's content. Keep surviving over there, you still owe me. The money you left was not even close to enough to pay for the stuff you took. Stay alive until you paid your debt. Tord." Seth could feel the care of the dwarf from these short words. There was no way the dwarf would see that money. Simon saw his smile. "Good news. I guess they are." They ate together before Seth returned to his room. He had recovered and felt relaxed. It was the best condition to start. He removed the vengeful souls from the bow and started fusing them with medium-sized souls. It took about 9 before the modifier on the soul changed to big. With the soul ready, he took the wood lathno, billet, and singing. The flat shook under the vibrations of the guttural demonic song. This song was one of the more terrifying ones Al taught him, but it fit the previous effects of the soul very well. It would imbue the projectiles with the attribute of decay. As he sang, the demonic runes slithered from his lips and entered the wood. At the same time, he had to concentrate on infusing the soul even into the material. Both tasks took a lot of mental force, and his head soon started to ache. His forehead was covered with sweat that started running down his face. Even if he wanted to, he could not stop at this point. The demonic ballad forced him to continue as it consumed his mana. Fold by fold he infused and distributed the enchantment and the soul throughout the wood. More and more the wood looked like layered steel, and he started shaping the bow. He used twisted wire made from 3 threads of celestial bronze as the bowstring and infused a tiny bit of the souls into it. The ballad finally ended and he had finished infusing the soul. His clothes were drenched in sweat, he looked as if he had taken a walk by heavy rain. He felt really exhausted and his head ached, but he gave the bow the finish it deserved. After sanding and polishing it, he tumbled towards the water barrel and dunked the bow into it. Ding! You have succeeded in making an epic rated item. Ding! You are the first to create an epic rate item on your server. +5 to all stats. Ding! The lame one is watching you with great interest. Ding! A synergy has greatly increased the power of your item. It was a smooth and sleek looking recurve bow. The surface was densely covered with a black and grey pattern, making it look pitch black from the distance. Standing on the ground it almost reached his chin, so it was a little shorter than 180 centimeters. Cursed Bow of Decay. Epic. Damage, 570. Durability, 2400. 1 arrows shot with this bow show great malice and will aim to hit vital points. 2 inflicted wounds will cause greater pain and won't heal naturally. 3 inflicted wounds will start to decay and have a high chance to get infected and poison the target. A terrifying weapon made by the devious hands of Journeyman Smith. A bow possessed by a malicious will to hurt its benefactor's enemies. If someone other tries to use this bow they will be hit by the curse of decay. Usage requirements, Seth Smith, 90 strength. And he had yet to carve an enchantment into the bow. He suddenly had the thought, that maybe he shouldn't enchant it himself and find an enchantment master like Tord instead. He had a plan for the enchantments beforehand, but he had not expected the weapon to be epic rated. The enchantments felt slightly shabby compared to its current abilities. When his excitement over the new weapon finally waned and he stopped touching and playing with the bow, he realized what the messages had said. Epic items also brought epic rewards. +5 on all his stats. That was like 5 or 6 level UPS, but unlike the normal attribute points, these were also distributed into luck and personality. This meant he would look even better from now on. Wasn't there something else? He tried to remember what other message was there between these announcements. Oh no. There was another god watching him now. But wait. He started watching him after he made the item. Maybe this god was interested in crafting? Then he would give this god a good show. There was nothing to lose. He might even get some overpowered blessing. Seth had big plans, but the time was not right. He needed to take the next step in one fell swoop and he lacked the energy now. Instead, he started making some weapons to sell. On one hand, there was still a shop in Aura he needed to supply. Seth had not forgotten about that. He had written a letter to Bertram to tell his clerk to keep selling the stock but at double the price. His wares would still be below market price, but the stock would last longer. He also contacted Marn and asked if he wanted to take over the shop. It was still a good place to sell his weapons. Otherwise, he would have to close the shop or find a way to send merchandise via the church. The other reason was that he didn't feel like converting his currency. So, he planned to casually make some weapons and sell them for credits through the church. He had mana to spare and used a demonic ballad he had not gotten to use until now. Using high-quality steel he made a bunch of uncommon swords and enchanted them with a demonic ballad. It was similar to the curse on the bow, but the effect it created was like soul-bound items in games. Once an owner was registered, nobody else could use this weapon. These were meant to be sold in Earth. Seth guessed that people would appreciate weapons that cannot be stolen with the current situation in this world. He also put a simple enchantment for fire damage onto the weapon. Fire Sword. Uncommon. Damage 283. Durability 1250. 1 plus 75 fire damage mana cost 15/minute. A magic sword casually made by Journeyman Seth to make some money. The only flaw was the description. People really didn't need to know his reasons. Everything else seemed fine. Seth did not want to introduce the people of Earth to two strong weapons. He was already doubting whether this was not already too good. The weapons also needed to be affordable. Yeah, as if he would thoroughly bleed them dry. From now on, this was a pay-2win game and Seth intended to be the item shop. He made 7 swords in a matter of a few hours until it became evening. Is Simon still here? He asked Samuel when he met him in the canteen. No, he already left. Can I help you with anything? Samuel asked as they sat down. I think you are more qualified anyways. Are you interested in a business? After Seth had pitched his idea, they relocated to Samuel's office. It was a simple deal in the end. The church would be his front and sell the weapons he made for credits. In exchange, the church would get a management fee. One might ask why the church did not just sell weapons, to begin with. On one side it was too big of interference into the lives of the Orihuma. And it was not cost-effective. It was expensive to transfer weapons and goods from another dimension and the natives were poor. Chapter 153. Auction House. What is this? -15 minutes earlier. Mark Baker was at the headquarters of the Special Defense Department in Y City. In his possession, he had a whopping 130 gold. These were all assets of Koku City. Together with roughly 70% of Y City's budget, it added up to 667 gold. They did everything they could to collect system currency, but the supply was simply lacking. The only source of gold in Earth at the moment were dungeons and trade with people from the Pathworks. The rough methods used in the beginning had complicated their option of trade. It was not like there were few dungeons on the territory of Y City, but the number of dungeons they could successfully raid was limited. This was all the gold they were able to buy from their citizens via the shops. Mark was currently located in a meeting room inside one of the most important buildings of Y City. The highest-ranking officials had gathered here. Spending this painstakingly collected money was an important decision. The money and device were handed to a magician with an uncommon class. He had a psychic ability to share his sight, like this all members could see the effect of the item and confer among themselves. When the mage channeled mana into the silver device, a window opened in front of his eyes, similar to the system windows. Hello, customer. You are accessing the auction house via a portable terminal. Your current dimension differs from the purchase location. Please keep in mind that cross-dimensional purchases will each have an additional shipping fee of 3 gold. The auction house wishes you a nice day. Following this message was the main site of the auction house. It resembled the websites of similar purposes. There was a search bar, recommended articles, and a long list of different product categories. One difference was that the user could choose between local and interdimensional. Everyone in the room knew how to navigate on a site like this and understood the additional shipping fee. Without anyone even telling him, the mage first sorted by local. There was nothing. Nobody on Earth was selling something via the auction house. Begrudgingly they had to change to interdimensional trade. What they needed the most were good weapons and armor. It involved many losses to defending the city with just their skills and bare bodies, and there was no chance to get an upper hand. The whole situation could flip, once they got a chance to get an upper hand. Present. Seeing the prices of items in the auction house made those present call out in rage and despair. Most of the common weapons easily exceeded the performance of many of the items officials ever saw on Earth. They already dreamed of equipping a whole army and raising the dungeons, but the price of 5 to 10 gold per weapon shattered their dreams like broken glass. The armor parts were even more expensive than the weapons. One had to keep in mind that this was an auction house. The prices were not fixed. However, this was the only chance, so they had to pay the instant buy prices. It made sense, even if these items were common ranked, there would not be any mediocre items in the auction house. Not everyone was like Seth and sold for cheap because they only needed a way to empty their inventory. With these prices, they might be able to fully equip 2 or 3 squads at most. Was this enough to make a difference? No. These items were definitely much better than what they had right now, but it was not enough to bridge the difference in strength to their enemies. Those squads would only die trying to clear more difficult dungeons before they break. Even if the people came back, the items might be lost. The official took an hour to come to a solution. After all, this was their only chance. The decision was to buy higher-ranked items and form small elite teams. This seemed like the best use of their money. This was also a good idea for public relations. They could make them heroes to motivate and reassure the populace. Tears ran down their face as the mage changed to uncommon ranked items. This was simply heart-rending. Uncommon items ranged between 20 to 30 gold. If they were frugal, they could maybe equip a group of 5 people with uncommon items. They almost did not dare to look at the rare items. They lost all hope. The rare items started at 30 gold and there didn't seem to be an upper limit. What had Baker said? There was a guy going around in a set of rare or above items. Just what did he do to accumulate that much via this auction house? They ended up purchasing a mix of common and uncommon items to equip 2 elite teams. The next step would be to choose the heroes of Y City. While others were hard-pressed with the decision of buying uncommon items, Seth lightheartedly left a bunch of uncommon swords with Samuel to sell. His opinion of the priest had really risen and Seth saw that the same applied to Samuel as his affinity with Seth rose to 300. He was quite the devilish old man. When Seth told him that he really wanted to make people bleed, the priest came up with many fiendish ideas to maximize their profits. The church would take it upon itself to advertise and host the new and upcoming event, a public auction. Hosted by the System Church, not even Y City's leadership could pull some shady stuff like confiscating the items. They even publicized the performance of the sword and the fact that an owner could be registered. This option caused great ripples than even Seth had anticipated. If no one but the owner could use the sword, it would make theft or confiscation completely useless. In the eyes of these people, who had been fighting with weapons that were barely better than the billhook Seth made in the very beginning, these swords were legendary items. The higher UPS were also shocked by the church's revelation. They had just obtained a collection of high-grade items and soon after they dropped such a bombshell. The worst thing was that anyone with money could buy these swords. These people might get in the way of their hero project. They would have to pull together all their assets to get all items. Seth didn't know that the events he himself had kicked off would come together bring him a windfall. Seth was occupied with the preparations of making his own equipment. Chapter 154. Epic, 2. Various potions were lined up on the table in the room. Stamina, health, mana, concentration, and satiety potions. The last potion had the effect of providing nutrition for 3 days and suppress the hunger during this time. These were his preparation for maybe the longest forging session ever since he became a blacksmith. The second to last potion helped the mental force to strengthen and recover. It was the morning of the day when Samuel would announce and start advertising the auction. Seth summoned the soul smithy. He took off his shirt and wore a headband to stop the sweat from getting in his eyes. Seth placed 2 of the wyvern fangs on the anvil. They were the length of his forearm and just as thick at the base. For the weapon he wanted to forge he needed at least this much material. In this session he even had Cerberus help him. The golem had the peculiar skill to mirror the summoner's skills. The two, man and golem, took turns hammering the teeth into shape. There was never a moment when their hammers stopped as they forged the teeth into 2 uniform billets. This was just a preparatory action. The next step was to weld the 2 billets. This was easier said than done. Seth had already gotten a taste of the difficulty when he folded the bozewood the other day. Normally when it came to forge welding metals the billets would need to be thoroughly heated to the right temperature before welding them together with hammer strikes. In this type of forging there was no heat involved, but mana. This meant Seth would have to keep the teeth completely soaked in his mana to keep them malleable until they became one piece. On top of this came not just singing the demonic ballad but also a partial soul infusion. Exactly, partial. Seth brought out the wyvern soul, massive. This was his big plan. This soul was not just rare-rated but also gigantic and extremely powerful. It would be a waste to put it in just one item, so Seth decided to use it to make a whole set. He separated out a 1/4 of the wyvern soul and brought it on the anvil. Then he started infusing mana in his voice and began singing the Blood Drinker ballad. His was the start signal and everything came into motion. Golem and Blacksmith were forging the ivory-colored billets to the dark tunes of the demon world. Like yesterday, the runes and soul were slowly fusing into the material as the two working it. The ivory color turned into a dark grey with a reddish sheen. He felt much better than yesterday, thanks to the potions he had drunk, and they soon started giving the material its shape. The weapon Seth planned to make was neither a saber nor a sword. It was a broad single-edged blade as long as a long sword and slightly curved. The weapon Seth planned to make was a Kriegsmesser. A big one similar to a bastard sword in size, maybe slightly bigger. After the blade had taken shape, the ballad was close to its end and the soul piece was almost completely fused into the blade. During the last verses Seth made the big crossguard and the characteristic nail from mithril and fused the rest of the soul into it. To finish the construction, he used a piece of the snake fangs for the handle scales and quenched the weapon in the waters of Styx to seal the soul inside the item. He knew it was technically finished, but he got no notification that he had finished an epic-rated item. The reason was that he was still using soul infusion to keep the other 3/4 of the massive soul stable. Seth was making a whole set, so it was only finished when all pieces were done. This was also why he prepared to work for a long time. He needed to finish all 4 items in one go. Before he started on the next item, he sat down to enchant the Kriegsmesser, only then, it would really be finished. The enchantments he chose were the 2 complex circuits life steal and armor destruction. He didn't choose bleeding because Al had advised him against it. This was a weapon made from the tooth of a race close to a dragon and he infused the soul of its previous owner. The Lich had conjectured that together with the ballad, the properties of the material would generate a skill like bleed on their own. He got the notification that he succeeded in enchanting, but the weapon was not finished. The next part of the set was a ring. For this, he used something he had kept up his sleeve for a long time, ever since he had found it. He had looked into it and found nothing better for this purpose, the blood garnet. It was a product from a dragon race. This was a step above something like a wyvern, which only counted as relatives. It had a strong affinity with fire, and he had long thought about how to use it. This ring was the essence of his will to use more of his fire-related abilities in the future. Ding! Skill, Goldsmith, Adept, Leave 9 has become Goldsmith, Adept, Leave 10. Ding! Skill, Goldsmith, Adept, Leave 10 has become Goldsmith, Journeyman, Leave 1. Finally, his Goldsmith had caught up in rank. For the ring's body, he chose Cernum, and as the nucleus the blood garnet. Seth had no ballad that fit very well with what he wanted, so he chose the one with the least drawbacks. It slightly increased the durability and added the chance of strengthening an attack with a random curse. The enchantments were inspired by Dragonbane, and he had Al's help to do it. One enchantment lessened the cost of skills and the other increased his willpower. The ring was the easiest of the items he had to make and worked as a small break in between the two most demanding items. Seth had to turn on the lights before he continued. It had already gotten dark outside. The fire glass found its place on the anvil. Next up was the cuirass. The lump of fire glass was just enough for a breastplate, but Seth would not stop there. Accompanied by another ballad, they started to forge the lump of red opaque crystal into an elegant breastplate. The demonic runes turned the glass darker and darker until it became dark crimson and almost clear. The effect of this ballad would give Seth the option to reflect a portion of the damage he received in exchange for some of his blood. Technically it was an armor of thorns that would do damage to both parties, but a lot less to the user. Above the heart, Seth added 4 wyvern scales forming a cross to protect his heart. Under the constant strikes of hammers, the dark green scales and demonic runes fused into the crimson red glass and turned a deep black. Seth was in a good mood and playfully carved the relief of dragon head onto the sternum of the breastplate. He split and forged 20 of the remaining scales and used part of the hide of the white bull to add a scale skirt to the breastplate that reached all the way down to his knees. As he looked at the almost finished cuirass before him, he again felt that the planned enchantments were somewhat lacking, similar to how he felt with the bow. This wasn't a problem, since he could always add them later. The sky outside was already lightening again. He needed to finish the last part of the set, the shield. Before the exhaustion caught up to him, he used the same song he used for the cuirass and started merging the 11 scales he had left behind. Seth used dark steel for reinforcement and made a round shield, slightly bigger than a buckler. Inspired by the cuirass, he molded a terrifying dragon face onto the shield, and by the time the song ended, the scale had turned almost black. When he dunked the shield into the water barrel, a barrage of notifications flooded into his mind. Ding! Various elements have formed a synergy and cause effects to grow. Ding! You have created an epic item, X4. Ding! You have created your first epic set. All stats +5. The lame one is impressed with your work. Ding! Skill, Energy Circulation Leave 9 has become Energy Circulation Leave 10. Ding! The fatigue was catching up. He couldn't hear the rest of the announcements. He was finally done. Now he could know he was not done yet. He still needed to enchant the shield with Demoralizing and Shield. The shield would create a barrier proportional in strength to the mana supplied, while Demoralize made the targets listless and unwilling to fight. Seth concentrated one last time to carve the circuits into the shield. The sun stood high above in the sky as Seth finally fell on his bed and lost consciousness before he could even take a look at his finished items. Chapter 155. Can I really have this? Aura. In a dirty small bar sat 4 figures. One was very big and one was so small she sat on the table. Yule cats fur lacked their usual jolly atmosphere. Even Mina the promiscuous cat girl had a hard time leaving the table. The party had sat there all evening and fought a hard fight against the tavern's beer supplies. Seth really won't come back. Mina was listlessly rested on the table, hugging her tankard. At least he is okay, Mike answered drunk. Yeah. Bulko agreed solemnly. Lixis was a flyweight when it came to drinking and had slid below the table long ago. She was in a deep drunken slumber. Stop moping, guys. Didn't his letter offer to bring us over? The fairy was sitting on the table and chugging beer from a tankard several times her size. We should train really hard. Even if he does not call for us, we should follow him once we are strong enough, she said. Finn had planned to follow Seth anyways. Her word fell on fertile ground. In the ears of the terribly drunk group, this sounded like a good idea and took firm root in them. Why City? Seth woke up after a long dreamless sleep. He was rolled into his blanket like a caterpillar and had no intention to leave his cozy cocoon. "Hey! Are you finally awake?" The voice of Al destroyed his cozy loafing. "That guy, Samuel, has been trying to talk to you for like half an hour." "Samuel?" he asked drowsily. "Samuel," he called a little louder to see whether the priest was still there. If not, he could. "Seth. Are you finally away? The auction will start soon. You should get ready if you want to watch it." Met. Grumbling and complaining, Seth crawled off the bed and pulled himself in the direction of the bathroom. A nice warm shower helped invigorate his tired mind. He left the bathroom and stepped back into his smithy. The 4 pieces of equipment were randomly lying around in his workshop. He had even forgotten to store them away, or at least place them nice and orderly. Of course, he knew most of their effects, but the final effect would have changed again after the set was finished. The first item he picked up was the big Kriegsmesser that was lying on a workbench. Wyvern Blade. Epic Wyvern set 1/4. Epic. Damage 1200. Durability, 3500. 1. Will absorb part of the target's blood to heal and strengthen itself. 2. Will absorb part of the target's blood to heal and strengthen the user. 3. Skill Lacerate. 4 plus 50% damage against enemies that cannot defend themselves. 5 plus 150% damage against armors. A Kriegsmesser forged by journeyman smith from rare materials. A plethora of special treatments and enchantments massively increased the weapon's performance above what just the materials could accomplish. Set effect. 2/4 ring end blade plus 50% damage on all fire-related attacks. Plus 25% damage on physical attacks. 2/4 blade slash shield plus 50% on all physical attacks plus 25% overall defense. 2/4 shield slash cuirass plus 50% overall defense. 4/4 plus 50% damage on all fire-related attacks. Plus 50% on all physical attacks plus 50% overall defense. Skill, Dragon Might. Usage condition, Seth Smith, 70 strength. Seth had not seen many epic items, but compared to the Ring Dragon Bane this did not look too shabby. "See? I told you, you would not need an extra enchantment," Al said smugly. What she was talking about was Lacerate. Lacerate, active skill. No cost. Cooldown, 120 SEC. The next attack will ignore any kind of armor. 100% probability to cause strong bleeding. This skill was like a higher version bleeding. This was not the only difference. The fear effect had changed. This was most likely a synergy between the material, the soul, and the enchantment's effect. The fear effect most likely went into the set effects skill Dragon Might. Dragon Might, toggle skill. No cost. All vermin shall bow. Enemies in the range of 200 meters will be restricted in their movements and stats lowered. Effects depend on the difference in the target's level and attributes. Possible effects: paralyze, demoralize, fear, stun, weaken, slow, faint. This seemed way too strong. Was it really okay for him to have this at level 27? The effects depended on the difference in basic strength, so Seth would have to test this in action to see its true worth. But just the description sounded very powerful. The sword was already such a big surprise. What would the other items look like? Next, he grabbed the ring from the jewelry station. Wyvern Ring. Epic Wyvern set 1/4. Epic. Durability 2600. 1 plus 75% fire damage. 2 plus 75% magic damage. 3 75% skill cost on fire-based skills. 4 plus 15% chance for a random curse to be added to an attack. 5 skill will power up. A ring created by Journeyman Smith. It's the essence of the maker's hidden desire to become an even more efficient arsonist. Set effect collapsed. How did the system know his deepest desires? No. What the hell was wrong with this description? He definitely did not plan to be an arsonist. Oh Seth. I knew you were good with fire. But I didn't know you were that naughty. Al teased him full of schadenfreude. She too had often suffered from the sarcastic comments the system would randomly add to the item description. The first version of Dragon Bane called her a rejected Dragon Con. The great me always knew. Knew it all the time. It was Puffles the lost son. The lazy piece of caterpillar that had been loafing around in the other room, while Seth was working hard. He used the situation to besmirch his reputation as revenge for his day as a silkworm. You shut up. What were you even up to while I was working hard? KQer. Q. I meditated, yes. Don't question the great me. I am beyond any doubt. Seth glared down Puffles until the eye-visor retreated to his room. The ring's effects were great, but Seth did not feel happy for some reason. He equipped the ring and the blade and started to channel his energy to test the consumption of the fire blade. The energy moved a lot smoother and the consumption of the ability was almost negligible. He checked his status. The decrease in consumption was one thing, but why was the energy flowing so smoothly? It was then that he saw, that not only had energy circulation upgraded to energy circulation, 2, but he had also gained a new skill reinforce. Finally, Tord had taught him about this skill. This was a smith skill based on energy circulation. Energy circulation had the passive effect of slightly strengthening the material. Reinforce was the intentional use of this effect. The perk of this skill was that it could also be used to strengthen finished items later on. His mood had improved after finding out about this power-up. On the enchantment table waited the shield for him. It was the last item he had made the other day. Wyvern Shield. Epic Wyvern set 1/4. Epic. Physical.def, 1200. Mag DEF 900. Durability, 4200. 120% less damage from magic. 215% less damage from wind-related attacks. 3 generates a shield with 500 durability when equipped. Takes 60s to regenerate when broken. 4 demoralizes all who look at it. A terrifying shield made by Journeyman Smith. The lifelike grimace of a wyvern is sculpted on the surface. Set effect collapsed. The wyvern face on the front of the shield looked really lifelike. It fit the effect of demoralizing those who look at it. The shield was another one of those options that made Seth doubt whether he should be owning this so early in the game. Measured on the current players, the majority would probably be unable to even break his shield. Just equipping the shield turned him into the Pope Mobile without anyone able to touch him. The shield's effects looked a little plain at first glance but were not to be underestimated. Seth's eyes wandered to the piece he saved for last. The cuirass was probably the most ambitious part of the set since it used 3 very different materials as main components. Wyvern Cuirass. Epic Wyvern set 1/4. Epic. Physical.def, 1150. Mag DEF 825. Durability, 4000. 150% less damage from fire-related attacks. 230% less damage from earth-related attacks. 315% less damage from wind-related attacks. 420% less damage from magic. 5 Curse, Reflect. The tremendous work of Journeyman Smith. The synergy between several different kinds of materials and treatment has turned this cuirass into a frightening item. Set effect collapsed. Oh, ho ho, this one's something else. Al exclaimed and told him to check number 5. Curse, Reflect, Passive, No cost. Harm me and be despised. 50% of any attack that hits the Wyvern Cuirass is reflected, causing a natural curse. Wounds cannot be healed through conventional means. How had this happened? 50% reflection and no cost? Also, the matter with the wounds. This was way stronger than what the effect of the ballad should have been. This fucka! Seth exclaimed when Alzalsa confirmed his suspicions. He hide of the White Bull was cursed. Like hell, it was safe to use. It was by pure chance and luck that the bull's terrible curse had mixed with the enchantment and made something positive. Still, there was no way he would dare to use the rest of the leather for anything. That curse could easily hurt him if he dared to use this leather randomly. Imagine equipping a pair of leather boots and they start sucking the life out of you because they bestow you with the curse that makes nature and earth itself despise you. This stuff was worse than drinking the blood of a unicorn. Even Tim Roddle would not dare to suffer this curse. Seth, are you ready? The auction will start now. Chapter 156. Auction. POV of Rando. He entered the skyscraper that was once the main office of the Limar Group but had now become the property of the System Church. It was really a shame for one of the biggest enterprises in Y City to vanish overnight. It was an unmistakable warning to all actions and authorities of the district. Never thoughtlessly mess with other worlders and most importantly don't offend the System Church. Today he had come because he was personally invited to a public auction on the premises of the church. Public, in this case, meant that anyone with enough money and the means to come in time was welcome. A huge crowd of mostly familiar faces filled the venue for the auction. Anyone of rank and name, who had the means to reach the church in time, had come. He knew many personally and some only fleetingly. Everyone had come for the chance of obtaining powerful equipment. They had kept their money and property, but no matter how much money and property they were able to amass, the last months had made it obvious that strength was the only solid currency in this world. To preserve what they had built up, they needed to adapt to this world. Even the old monsters who had long retired had decided to show their faces here. There were not just the elites of the old world. A good portion of the guests were up-and-coming players. There were people with special classes like the Saintess. Nobody knew her exact class, but she was able to single-handedly keep a row of tanks alive during a raid. And others that were lucky, like the Golden King, who had golden hands and was lucky enough to gain uncommon items from dungeons. It was even rumored that he had some rare ones. It did not matter what they were before, these people throve in this new era. Success was now decided by one's class, skills, effort, and talent. This made items so important. They were the only way to balance out what one lacked. They could turn a kitten into a tiger or add wings to a tiger. Like in the case of the Golden King, he managed to become a prominent figure with his fortune alone. All of the guests have now arrived. I greet all of you to today's event. The priest of the System Church, Samuel, had made his entrance on the stage. His imposing stature made the hall fall silent. Seth. Samuel fulfilled his part of their little deal perfectly. For the blacksmith, this was just a little additional income. For the church and the upper society of Aura, it was an event that might change the course of history. It was the first time that such good items were simply sold in such a way. It was a full house with several hundred of the richest people of Y City and accomplished adventurers. This auction was merely an appetizer. The biggest act of advertisement. Today they would sell 7 swords, but this was just to whet their appetite. After today the info would spread far more powerful. Once all of these people started talking and bragging to their friends and acquaintances. Then during the next auction, all the rich people of the district would come to throw their money at them. Seth had entered the hall in his good attire from Aura, effectively disguising as an otherworlder of the church. He came to take a look and collect some information. He listened to the gossip of high society. Isn't that the adventurer that managed to close a dungeon in the southern district? They were pointing at a woman in her late 20s. She looked pale, almost sickly. Her robe and other visible items were common, but her pointy witch hat was actually an uncommon item that strengthened witchcraft and affinity with plants. It was most likely a dungeon drop. The Forest Witch. Quiet. Don't call her like that. She doesn't like that name. Ah, sorry. She's AC rank now, right? Forget her. Look over there. That's the Paladin. He got an epic class and used the money of his family to fully equip his own guild. They pointed at a man who attended the auction in a full suit of silver plate armor. They were all good common items but lacked any interesting effect. They increased stuff like endurance slightly. The armor was nothing special, but his weapon and shield were both uncommon. The effects were mediocre, but they shined like pearls in this environment. Wow! Even if we have money, we can't compete with an epic class. Don't talk about epic classes. We could not even compare to those with rare classes. Another good use for this auction. Seth could get a picture of the current strength distribution and powerhouses in the region. He had an easy time in the other world because he had technically double the attributes. It was not the same on Earth, he was clear that he lacked this advantage here. When he imagined the power of the beasts on Earth he was afraid, but there was also tingling of excitement. The beings of Earth would push him to the limits but he couldn't wait to make and improve his items and grow stronger. When he thought back to his greatest enemy, the Titanoboa juvenile, he was still unsure whether he could beat that monster in a fair duel. That was the advantage beasts had, they were strong even without gear. On the other hand, he still had truckloads of materials from that one monster and all of it was uncommon. Imagine the amount of rare or even epic materials he could get from a genuine field boss. This was the reason he was looking at the prominent people of this world. If Seth wanted to harvest whatever this world could give him, he needed allies, a party. Most people that were able to carve a place for themselves in this dangerous world were now here. If this was not the best opportunity to get an impression of possible companions, what was? It was also a good time. Right now, he had kind of a monopoly on good items but he could not keep his technological advantage forever. The players of Y City were slowly gaining an upper hand as their levels grew. The stronger they were, the easier they could farm better items from dungeons. This was a long process, but it could not be stopped. So, this is what the high society of your world looks like, eh? There are not many promising people here. Are you sure you can make a party? The lich on his belt asked unconvinced. What are their levels, Al? Seth whispered. This was the reason he wore this inconspicuous token and masqueraded as an otherworlder. He could freely appraise people's items, but observation would immediately alarm the target. Alzalsa on the other hand had genuine appraisal and could spy at people's status. The good ones range between 35 and 40 with the highest being level 43. It's not bad considering they had less than a year to reach those levels. Those were the people that had gotten this far without many chances to gain appropriate equipment. Just how much further would they be able to go in the future? They would be strong allies if Seth could get them on his side. As mentioned in the invitation every one of you has received, the church will auction off 7 swords today. Each of the swords is rated uncommon and features 2 enchantments. The ability to be bound to an owner and a superior fire enchantment, which we will now demonstrate. At this point, Samuel paused and gesticulated to the people backstage. A few people brought out a big cage onto the stage. Within the cage was a terrifying roughly humanoid sea creature. Seth and Samuel had talked about this before. In the beginning, the greatest threat for Y City was an oceanic empire that attacked the coast. It was not widely known to the people of the district, but Samuel told him that the humans had actually lost 4 and not just 2 satellite cities at the coast. Even if they managed to push back the enemy forces, those cities were razed and these beasts were still roaming the ruins. These were mindless soldiers and could be easily caught by the church's hunters. Everyone in the hall knew or even fought these things in the past and they were easy to come by, as such they were the optimal test dummy for demonstration. For this demonstration, the church had asked a well-known swordsman onto the stage. Inigo Monte was already slightly older. His class was uncommon and he already knew how to wield a sword long before the apocalypse. Everyone knew his prowess, even so he was not one of the strongest or most prominent figures of Y City. This man took one of the swords on display and scrutinized it with a surprised look. He gave it some test swings before channeling mana into the sword. A fierce flame surrounded the blade that surprised even him. After getting used to the sword he nodded towards the man beside the cage. The door of the cage opened and the man rushed in, slashing at the beast. These creatures had once brought true terror upon the citizens of Y City and it had taken many losses to drive them back. Inigo himself had fought hard battles against these creatures. He knew just too well how hard it had been to even injure these things. It was a bitter memory, watching his companions die one by one as they could only chip away at its health. Now, one of them was almost helpless as it tried to back away from the man's burning sword. The weapon did not bounce away or slide off the mucus of the beast's skin like he experienced before. Big burning gashes opened every time he slashed at the beast. It was only a matter of 3 or 4 slashes before the monster shriveled up and burned to death. Chapter 157. Auction, 2. Inigo looked perplexed at the sword. Was this really possible? There were even small tears in the corner of his eyes. This reaction was quite normal, for someone who wielded a good weapon for the first time. Inigo was a fencer, an uncommon advancement from a swordsman. His attack power was based on his attributes Dex/Agi and the performance of the weapon. Like most combat classes, the power of his skills was based and scaled with his basic attack power. The difference in effect between this sword and his original sword that had a damage of 75 was simply astronomical. He felt like was eating soup with a fork and now somebody finally gave him a spoon. I think this should suffice to demonstrate the weapon's performance. Thank you, Mr. Monty. Very reluctantly Inigo put the sword back in its sheath and onto the display. As he left the stage and gave it one last wistful glance like a lover seeing off her husband. As you can see, we have 7 sword. Supply is limited but there is no need to be anxious. From now on, we will hold this auction regularly. Even if you don't get an item today, you can always come back. Let us begin. The course of the auction was a good example of supply and demand. In Aura, Seth would sell this kind of weapon for 5 or 6 gold. If a gold coin equaled 100k he would get only 500k for one of the swords. But the demand for these weapons was over the top and the bidders easily drove the price into the millions. And the price kept climbing with every sword that was sold. In the end, the swords very sold for the sum of 67 million credits. Seth would have no financial problems in the near future. As for who bought the sword, 3 of the swords were actually bought by an acquaintance, Mark Baker. Seth had no idea that he too had come to Y City, but he guessed that he acted as the representative of the SDD. On that note, Seth felt curious whether they had already used the interface and what they bought. Were they consolidating good items to make an elite squad? Depending on their decisions, Seth might need to hurry with putting together his team before they snatched people away from him. While Samuel was busy auctioning off the swords and people were busy bidding on them, Seth was not lazy. With the help of his all-seeing owl, he was able to spot the people with potential. And with some gossip, he also got a rough idea about their reputation and personality. There were some promising people, but one person really attracted his interest. The Gourmet LV-31. Class Gourmet Hunter Unique. A mix of a hunter and a cook with the ability to gain permanent powers from cooked food. Seth's eyes sparkled. How good would it be to travel with someone like that? Ha, how unlucky. The auction had just ended. He was unlucky and unable to buy any of the swords. The prices had far exceeded what little fortune he was able to accumulate since the world went downhill. In the end, money still mattered. Although he had no skills to use a sword, he could have tried to gain and train the skill. He might have even thought about changing his class. With the strength he could gain, it would become easier to protect his daughter. Alas, since he did not get one, it meant he had no fate with those swords. He could only sigh and move on. It wasn't like he was doing bad at the moment. Mr. Jackson, do you have a moment? As he was about to leave the venue, a clerk suddenly approached him. They knew his name? What could the church want from him? He didn't offend them, right? It couldn't be that he accidentally did something heretic and now they would punish him. Mr. Jackson? Are you okay? The patron of today's auction would like to invite you to a private meeting. The patron? Tecker was hesitant, but it did not seem like they wanted to punish him. This might be a chance. Patron sounded like it would be an important person. He followed the clerk to the elevator, which brought them to one of the upper floors, where they entered a cozy-looking meeting room. It seemed like the church had modified this place and it looked more like a lounge with comfy chairs and couches. In the room were already several people waiting. There was a young woman with long straight hair. If not for her rectangular glasses, her face would be hidden behind that curtain of her hair. She wore a dark purple robe and had a silent, composed aura. Leisurely sitting on the couch with his arms and legs spread away from him sat a young man in colorful casual clothes. His bright blonde hair was styled into spikes, making his head look like a brush. He wore funky sunglasses and a big self-confident smile on his face. Please have a seat. Your host will soon join you, the clerk said before leaving the room. Was he the last person to arrive? Tecker didn't know the girl, but the man on the couch was the gourmet hunter. He knew that the hunter had a unique class like himself. What could this patron want from them? Judging by the fact that he did not even know who the girl was, none of them were very strong or prominent figures. The only reason many knew the gourmet hunter was his eccentrical behavior. The other two also observed the newcomer. A hulking black man with a buzz-cut and a pencil mustache. He wore a tight suit that had a hard time restricting the bulging muscle from making the rest of the world feel inferior. Nobody talked as they waited for something to happen. It did not take long before a different door opened and a man entered the lounge. He was tall, no as tall as Tecker, and he had a muscular build, more balanced and not as massive as Tecker. He wore alien-looking clothes in a style, not from current Earth. An otherworlder? He wore a kind smile on his handsome face as he started speaking. I'm glad all of you decided to follow my invitation. Miss Orkney, Mr. Lighting, Mr. Jackson. The woman blushed when she heard her name and cringed when she heard the hunter's name. The hunter had a wide smile when he saw that he did not hesitate to use the name he gave himself. Tecker also cringed a little when he heard the name Lightning. It seems I have a little advantage. I know all of your names, but you don't know mine. Let me introduce myself. I am Seth Smith. Ding. The Lord of the Red Land is watching your actions interested. I'm a blacksmith from a city. And I'm the one who supplied the swords for the auction today. They all stared at him surprised. There was actually someone from Earth able to craft such items? But how? Their question was written on their faces and Seth decided to answer them. Since I started with a crafting class, I went and studied my craft in a different world. That totally makes sense, not? How did you simply travel to a different world? Lightning, the gourmet jumped up. If you join the church they transport you for free. I found a starter village after escaping from a city. But that's not the point. I recently returned and I wish to build a place for myself. And what does this have to do with us? Tecker asked calmly. I wish to invite you to join my party, Seth said with a big smile. I really believe we could be a great team. Chapter 158. Oddball Leader. Originally, Seth had wanted to test the water alone before looking for a party, but Samuel had moved faster than he had expected. The SDD, too. Back then he had just looked for a way to get them off his tracks but had not thought about the implications. He had to take care of the whole party stuff before he even got to finish his own equipment. Seth knew that he needed companions if he wanted to survive in this world. The problem was that he was not the best at dealing with people. Of course, he could go ahead and offer something like a working relationship. He could have them sign a contract and then lend equipment to them. But this was not what he wanted. All of these people before him were special in some way. All they lacked until now was an opportunity to truly grow. Seth felt that it would be the wrong way to start their relationship this way. These people had suffered, probably more than him. It felt disrespectful to just buy their cooperation. What would happen once they grew stronger? What if Seth left Y City? Over time his monopoly over good items would diminish. Would his items really be enough to keep an employee by his side? He didn't want these people as subordinates, but as partners, as friends. And he knew that they could be a great team and reach greater height together than individually. The gourmet hunter could not just harvest their prey with maximum efficiency but also cook meals that strengthened the party. Seth didn't mind that he lacked the firepower of a regular scout or hunter. This could be easily fixed with stronger weaponry. Wizarda Urkani would grow stronger the more knowledge she gained. Seth had a great sorceress with over 200 years of wisdom. He could offer her greater knowledge than anyone else. Not just on magic, together with the gourmet hunter's harvesting, she could dabble in alchemy, which was another useful source of knowledge. Tekker had a humongous amount of defense but was lacking as a tank since he had no helpful skills for a fight. His class lacked skills in attack and crowd control and it was extremely hard for him to learn those. Seth could not just boost his defense to new heights, he could also think of items to grant him such skills. Seth knew all of this because of Al, who had helped him appraise the people in the auction hall. These three had the greatest growth potential if they all worked together. And Seth knew that in a story the main character would normally find some really smart or natural way to get these people on his side or they would not care and establish a contract. Miraculously the people would become friends over the course of their journey and the earlier work relationship would be just a joke between friends. But Seth also knew that he could not do that. He did not believe to have such charisma and he was also not smart or eloquent enough to convince people while keeping his secrets. It felt all so bothersome and over-convoluted. Instead of doing all that, Seth simply told them the truth. He told them his story and about his class. He told them all the aforementioned and even his reason for telling them, that it was too bothersome to plan out something smart. The three looked at him like some absolute weirdo. This was no calculative or very smart move, but telling the truth had its very own effect. There were no suspicions about how he knew their names or skills. There were no doubts about his reasons. He even answered all their questions and showed proof willingly. Being honest during the first meeting had become something very special in this world. So even when Seth told them the truth, they still had doubts. And he accepted this, too. He also knew that one of them might leave, if they did not like the truth. But this meant that he did not need to keep secrets before those who stayed. He was also not afraid of betrayal. So, what if they knew his secrets? Seth had reasons to be afraid of the world, not of the people at least. Not only had he just finished an epic set and planned to equip himself with even more items like that, but he also had the church behind him. He did not want to see the world burn, but if it provoked him, he felt not opposed to being the fire starter. Well, to sum it up. I hope we can be friends and partners who support each other in the future. I understand if you want some time to think about my offer. You can visit me at any time once you come to a conclusion. It seemed like they needed some time among themselves. Seth smiled and left the room. After he left the room, a wave of fatigue came over him. This had been really hard. It was so exhausting to deal with strangers. Now, it was finally over. He had done everything to leave a good first impression. He relaxed a little and sat down on a chair in the small side kitchen. He had wanted to make an impressive exit that would leave an impression. He had accidentally entered the kitchen instead of leaving the lounge. What was he supposed to do now? They were not shooed away by any staff, but the clerks even kept supplying drinks and cookies. Silence reigned in the lounge as all of them sunk in their own thoughts. What Seth offered was not a simple job. They threw glances at each other. If what he said was true, they could go a long way if they relied on him and each other. Is it true that you can cook food that gives permanent buffs? Tekker suddenly asked the gourmet hunter. The female wizard also piqued her ears for the answer. Tekker himself felt not too offended for his secret to be revealed. Anybody could find out about the drawbacks of his class by listening to rumors. The chance to fix these flaws and make a name and career for himself weighed much more. Seth's offer was undeniably tempting if what he said about the others was true. This made it even more important for all of them to ascertain whether the information was correct. The gourmet hunter, Link Lightning, sighed. It seemed he would have to make the start. It irked him a little that his secrets were exposed, but he was never guy to hold grudges. Was it really that big of a deal? Compared to this chance, it was negligible. Especially since he got to know their secrets, too. Guess I will go ahead? Yet. I cannot just cook food that gives buffs, but as long as I get my hands on special ingredients, I have a low chance of making food that will grant a permanent buff. My skill level is still too low to make it something certain. My turn. Dude, do you really have like double the defense of a normal tank? I heard that you were tough, but that's a surprise. And you? Magical girl, can you really grow stronger just by reading books? He didn't feel like being the only one answering questions, so he threw some at the other two. The girl, Allison Orkney, just squinted at him and nodded in the end. Tekker blushed a little, hearing that someone like the gourmet hunter knew about him. Yet. It would be great, if I didn't lack in every other department aside from keeping myself alive. He laughed self-ironic. They were talking among themselves and even the wizard girl had joined them with some short comments. Suddenly Seth came back to the lounge. With a deep red face, he stormed through the room in a straight line, aiming for a specific door. Sorry to interrupt you, but I can't wait any longer. I really need to use the toilet. With that he left the lounge again through another door, leaving the three with a perplexed look on their faces. After Seth had left, Tekker and Link started laughing while even Allison snickered silently. They took this as a cue to leave. All of them had their own circumstances, wanted return home and sleep a night over it before making a final decision. But in their hearts, they had already decided. All members of their new party were unique, but their leader was a real oddball. Chapter 159. Joint Dungeon Dive. Seth sat in his room. Now all he could do was wait for them to make their decision and come back. In the meantime, he could finally get back to finishing his loadout. There were still a lot of things to make, but what Seth lacked were the fitting materials. He had a lot of good materials, but he lacked the means to imbue them with the effects he really wanted for the items he needed to make. His standards had grown after he finished something like the epic set. He didn't want the other items to lag behind. At this point, he really regretted having sold off the auction interface. Even if he asked the church to procure specific materials, it would take a long time. According to Samuel, the only auction house on Earth was in Delta, where the Krona Empire had taken residence. You should just do what you can instead of wasting your time on worries. Al was right. There was one thing he could do for now. Especially with her help. Over the next 2 days, the three came back and agreed to join him. They joined his party one by one and decided to make a dungeon dive to get to know each other. It was like the time when he joined Yulecat's Fur to get to know them better. They would not enter anything dangerous. First, they met in the Adventurer Guild of Y City. This was Seth's first time visiting an Adventurer Guild in Earth. It felt like a bank. No, it was a bank. It was one of the biggest banks of Y City that had been remodeled into the guild's main branch in this district. The receptionists at the counters were separated from the customer with clear polycarbonate walls, and the blackboards with the quests were fully digitalized touchscreen terminals. Although Tekker, Link, and Allison were people from Y City and had fought here from the very beginning, they had little knowledge of the dungeons in the district. Dungeon business had mostly consisted of containing the dungeon breaks, not preventing them. The reason was the lack of small elite troops. Dungeons were mostly unfit for big groups or raids, so they were not able to clear difficult or high-level dungeons. The only choice was to wait for the break and overwhelm the monsters with numbers. The human wave tactics worked but demanded a great number of sacrifices. The receptionist had a friendly business smile. Seth recognized it immediately. These were actual guild people, not natives of Earth. He was relieved that he could act as he always did in the guild. It was a shame that they had no booklet with a comprehensive rundown of dungeons in Y City. The reason was that more dungeons kept randomly appearing and kept being closed all the time. The people of Earth were still quite rowdy and did not care whether the guild approved of destroying a dungeon core. It was a direct consequence of the government's previous actions. The leadership did not listen to the guild at the start and had people shut down any dungeon that could be cleared to ensure the city's safety. From a modern regular standpoint, this might have been understandable, but it was simply short-sighted from the perspective of people who understood the system. Closing all dungeons that could be cleared meant that there were no low-level dungeons left for players to train and gain levels. This created another problem. It split the people even further into the elites who managed to gain levels by closing dungeons and those who could not gain levels because there were no dungeons in their level range. This was why the number of small teams that could deal with greater dungeons was severely limited. At this point, there were very few low-level dungeons in Y City and most of those only survived because they had opened after the guild took over the management of the dungeons. It was strictly forbidden to close these dungeons. Adventurers who did would be expelled from the guild. Seth asked for dungeons around Leave 20 and the receptionist gave him a rundown of a very short list of options within the city. Considering the city's size, this was pitifully few. At least the kinds of dungeons were quite interesting compared to Nemea. In the other world, the dungeons were a lot like you would expect from RPGs or fantasy games. In Y City, many dungeons had taken over the subway stations or whole buildings. It felt more like urban fantasy or post-apocalypse. The dungeon Seth chose was called Third Hospital. It was the kind of dungeon that had floors with increasing difficulty. The hospital's first floor was in Leave 10-20 area and perfect for a team-building measure. The rest of the party made long faces when they heard what dungeon their new leader chose. They had encountered the horror more than once. The floors actually went up to Leave 60. As such, nobody had yet been able to clear this dungeon or properly decimate the monster population. That was why the Third Hospital had broken out several times in the past. What crawled out from there equaled some of the worst horror games in history. Why had Seth chosen this haunted house of nightmares? It was the thrill. This was not a horror game, so Seth did not have to fear artificial ammunition scarcity or scripted events. How exciting would it be to break through a horror game with pure violence? Seth did not think of it as much more than a haunted house. All of them had an almost 10-level advantage. What could go wrong? As such, they went on a 35-minute walk to enter the southern district. The Third Hospital could in no way be called small. It was a giant complex and offered all kinds of treatment before the apocalypse. From what the guild staff told him, it sounded as if the patients and staff had been turned into the monsters when the dungeon initially formed during the apocalypse. There was a safety perimeter around the hospital in case something unexpected happened, and the entrance was guarded by black suits. From the outside, they could only see darkness behind the rows and rows of empty windows. The glass doors of the main entrance stood wide open, inviting people to come in and die. Seth wore his new equipment while using parts of the Black Knight armor to cover the missing pieces. The others wore their original items because Seth wanted to see their genuine performance before deciding on what items to make for them. Tekker wore a bulky set of steel plate armor. It looked like someone welded armor plates from a tank together and made Tekker resemble some generic bulky robot from an anime. Link, the gourmet hunter, was better off and wore a tight leather outfit. The main piece seemed to be a dungeon drop with the effect of increasing agility by 5 points. The rest was probably made by a tailor but had a good performance. Tailors seemed to do better than blacksmiths in this new world. Just how far could the clothing industry go once they started to mix skills and technology? What might have happened to this world if Seth had not returned? Would they develop superhero suits that buffed the wielder? Seth really liked the medieval style, so a world where people wore skin-tight superhero suits as equipment seemed like a cringy nightmare. He might be able to accept it, if worn as proper underwear below a suit of armor, though. Allison, the wizard girl, wore the same outfit as during their first meeting. Was this her only set of clothes, or did she visit the auction in work attire? She also carried a common staff that helped her save 5% mana per spell. But it really seemed more fit to whack the monsters really well. Seth had left Mary and Jane at the church since this dungeon would be too dangerous to take the two along. They approached the entrance in silence. There was nothing visible from the outside. Only after they stepped in and the doors closed behind them did they get a good look at the hospital. He felt reminded of a city where everything had been overgrown and destroyed in a matter of days but looked like it had taken decades. Even so, this was a perfectly functional hospital just 8 or 9 months ago. Now it looked abandoned and run down. Dim light fell in through the dirty and broken windows. Dirt covered the tiled floor and flakes of paint and plaster had detached from the walls, making everything look blotchy and damp. The air smelled stale with a hint of hospital and mold. Link, can you scout ahead? The rest will go in a line. Tekker in the front, then myself, Allison, and Puffles takes the rearguard. Sure, answered the gourmet hunter. He did not seem very confident as his eyes kept jumping left and right. Was he really that afraid of this place? Actually, Tekker was not much better. Although Seth could not see even an inch of his skin, his movements had become choppy and robotic after entering the dungeon. The only one who kept a neutral expression was Allison in the back, who kept observing their surroundings. Puffles was completely unaffected by the horror location. The Ivisor never saw a horror movie or played a horror game. The concept of a hospital was completely foreign to it. Seth had put the caterpillar at the end because its physical strength had improved quite a lot after the last evolution. Not only could he take the role of a healer, but also act as an off-tank. Puffles' physical prowess rivaled Seth's when fully buffed, despite having a lower level. It just showed that a divine race was no joke. It also meant that he did not need to worry about outgrowing Puffles later on. If the Ivisor ever grew to the size and power of Cernobulk, that giant Ivisor from before, they could easily raid most field bosses with just the two of them. Link came back, sweat covered his forehead. Seth had to stop with the daydreaming. They were in a really creepy dungeon right now. He was really supposed to concentrate. There is a group of 5 patients in the front, around leave 17. Maybe we should take another route and look for some weaker ones or a smaller group, he asked, nervous. Why are you guys so afraid? All of us are around leave 30. These creatures should not pose a problem to you even without fitting equipment. You have not fought these things yet. I don't know how the fights in that other world looked like, but the fights are totally unbalanced here. The level and strength are completely independent of another. It was Tekker, the tall black robot-looking man, who answered in a solemn echoey voice. It reminded Seth that levels were not always an accurate representation of strength. He was the best example. In aura, he had strength rivaling a B-rank adventurer, despite being only half the level. Seth nodded to show that he understood and turned serious. Maybe this would not be as easy as he thought. Chapter 160. Third Hospital. Link, did you say there was a group of patients ahead? Where are they? Seth asked as he looked down an empty, dimly lit hallway. The only thing there were some hospital beds stained with a dark sludge, maybe old blood? They were here just a moment ago. The gourmet hunter answered, confused. Seth and Allison both looked to the ceiling. The ceiling looked normal for now. In a game, it was a reoccurring phenomenon that mobs would suddenly break through the ceiling and surround you. Tekker. I think you should go forward, we will follow with some distance. Just in case we trigger a trap or an ambush. As if on cue, Puffles cast a shield on the Iron Man. Okay. He was the tank after all. Slowly and taking tiny steps, the Colossus of Steel shuffled his way along the corridor. His bucket-shaped helmet kept turning left and right as he held up his shield and sword ready to react. Unexpectedly, nothing happened. No monsters falling from the ceiling, no hand suddenly grabbing from the ground. The walls on either side of Tekker exploded and 2 bulging monstrosities looking like naked gorillas on steroids attacked the robot from both sides. The shield broke before Tekker could react in his cumbersome armor. He had not much time to cope as the 2 mobs started grappling him and hammering away at his armor, leaving deep fist imprints in the thick steel plates. Shit, it's the mental wardens. Why are they so close to the entrance? Link shouted in shock. Allison on the other hand had gotten into stance and already started chanting a spell. Seth did not stop to listen to the hunter's mumbling and charged forward. The pale flame lit up on the wyvern blade's edge as he slashed into the calf of the hunk on the right. He aimed for the leg, to minimize the risk of hitting his own tank. The strike felt like hacking into moist rotten wood. Steam and a terrible stench filled the air as the blade cut off the leg below the knee. Seth almost stumbled but managed to recover and take a step back. These creatures were a lot tougher than he expected and the blade had been slowed as if going through tar. Had he aimed for the torso, his weapon might have gotten stuck. The monster lost its footing, literally, and Tekker was able to shove it away, making it fall into Seth's direction, leaving him with only one opponent. The tank was now desperately trying to get his shield between himself and the warden to gain the upper hand against the touchy-feely foe. In this time Allison finally finished her chanting and a row of stone shackles grew for the floor and the wall. They grasped for the warden that was still wailing on Tekker and managed to catch its ankles, torso, and one of the wrists. The Ivisor also recast the shield, which gave Tekker the time to finally free himself from the enemy and fix his posture. The gourmet hunter took aim with multi-shot at the caught mob with his bow, while Seth decapitated the warden on the ground. Ding! You have killed mental warden leave 19. You have earned experience. Shortly after, the hunter had sunk his 5th arrow into the constrained warden's head and they all got the kill notification with a sigh of relief. Seth checked his experience bar and saw no difference. If the message had not said he gained experience, he would have doubted he got any. Even if the mobs were strong, it did not change that they got almost no experience thanks to the level difference. These mental wardens were easily comparable to many Level 40 or Level 50 mobs he had seen in the dungeons of Aura. No wonder people had a hard time dealing with the dungeons. This was just the first floor and there were already creatures like this. They regrouped and checked on Tekker. The damage looked worse than it was. Although the breastplate and shoulders had imprints and deformations, thanks to the thickness of the material it was still usable. Despite his huge pool of endurance, Tekker lost some health from the blunt force of the strikes. It was not much and Puffles was able to fix it with a weak healing spell. Seth turned to Link. You said they are normally not this close to the entrance? What are these mental wardens? From what I heard about this place, the wardens are originally a kind of wandering mini-boss in the mental ward. Then why were they here? I have no clue. The mental ward is actually a different complex link to the hospital via a single corridor. So, there is no way we accidentally walked in there. At this point, Allison pushed up her glasses and interrupted them. There are actually not that many people coming here. Most information is actually from the few survivors from the clearing attempts before the guild took over management. We technically lack information to judge what is the normal situation and what is not. The chance is high that the survivors simply met the most fortunate circumstances. Seth nodded. That made sense. It would be best if Seth let go of his habit of relying too much on the information. He had picked this up in Aura. There, one could get all the info on a dungeon from the guild since many adventurers had cleared it before. The dungeons on Earth were simply too new to be thoroughly investigated. It was best to prepare for an unexpected situation like just now. Since Tekker was okay, they decided to keep walking, with the hunter scouting their surroundings. As for the loot, Link harvested the 2 wardens, but except for the 2 monster cores, these humanoid monsters were useless. There were also no souls. There were actually people with dark professions like black magicians or necromancers that were interested in the brains of these creatures, but everyone agreed that they would not do something as unappetizing as harvesting the brain of a humanoid monster. By the way, Puffles, what happened to your shield? I get that these monsters are stronger than we are used to, but why did it break so fast? Q. You should be happy he had my shield. He would be mush already without the Great Me's support. He's right, you know. Those things used a skill resembling Power Strike when they charged through the wall. Your armor could withstand it, but that guy would look like a smashed, what was it called again? A smashed can of beans if the shield had not blocked that first attack. Kyuhu. See? Even the horny ghost agrees with my magnificence. Who are you calling a horny ghost, you worm? KQ. Who are you calling a worm, you rotten? Can you guys please stop having a mental smackdown in my brain? I have to concentrate. Seth whispered. He didn't want the others to think he was crazy. Although he told them that they communicated with him telepathically, it was still awkward. The party kept moving deeper into the hospital. After the initial shock from the wardens, they became a lot more careful. Link still scouted, but he stayed within their sight. 3 patients around the corner, he whispered after returning. The party approached the fork. Seth finally got a good look at the creatures. Their eyes were simply empty holes and the mouths were grown shut. They moved in sporadic erratic motions, flailing their arms as if they were blind. The skimpy patient gowns they wore made the view even more horrible if you approached them from behind. Puffles and Allison started off with a magic attack. The eye visor's magic bound the 2 creatures with glowing chains while Allison cast a fire wave that set them aflame. Seeing the burning humanoids, Seth wanted to try something and signaled Tekker to stay back for a moment. From about 10 distance, Seth tried to take control of the fire that was burning on the patients. Seth's go-to was the spirit flame because it was extremely powerful, but when he tried to control this normal fire, he realized that it was a lot easier. He was able to strengthen the flame and envelop the patients in a fire tornado, tremendously increasing the burn damage. He kept them burning until the binds were released. The moment they charged at the party, a row of arrows from the hunter penetrated their bodies and they were hit again by 2 magic attacks. One was Puffles' light bolt, the other was a stone needle that shot up from the ground and penetrated the other's stomach. Seth equipped Karen's obel and ended their lives, collecting 2 souls in the hammer. He had concluded that they were not grinding for experience anyways, so he could collect their souls on the way. Looking at the outcome of this fight, one could say that the normal monsters were manageable as long as they did not succeed in a surprise attack. But when they turned around to return to their original path, the hospital looked different. The corridor had become dimmer and darker. Vines were growing on the walls and from the ceiling. All kinds of dark ooze and pus started flowing from the walls. Looking at the hallways the two mobs had been, the same had happened.